A man sits alone in a dark room playing a computer game. He says that his only reason for living was to become the strongest in the world. We cut to a wild man engaged in battle with an enemy called the Labyrinth King Pharaoh. The man throws his arm back, his fist wrapped in flames as he goes for another blow. He had dedicated his whole life for this moment to become the strongest. His character rushes into the Labyrinth King to deliver a powerful punch. He deals an Aura Phoenix fist attack to the Pharaoh, a killing blow. A game notification screen announces the defeat of the Labyrinth King, its corpse left in the dust. The man or the character stands up to be greeted by another notification screen, officially announcing his win. Around him, other players stare in amazement as the Labyrinth King Pharaoh, an enemy none could beat, was single-handedly defeated by the man using only his fists. The man was known to be the Fist King, which was both his name and his title in the game. The world the man in front of the computer played in as the Fist King was a VRMMORPG, or to put simply, an online game. In that specific world, he was rather well known. He had chosen to play using only his fists, which is considered the weakest weapon in-game, and simply kept training. And so, just as the game services ended, the man had finally achieved his goal of defeating every boss in the game. The Fist King opened the game menu and logged out. Back in real life, the man in front of the computer took off his VR headset, his overall appearance exhausted and haggard. He's clearly seen better days, that's for sure. His chair topples backwards, taking him down with it to the floor. The man's strength was completely spent. As he lay on the floor, he suddenly remembered that he had failed to eat anything properly in the last 2 weeks. Excuse me? 2 weeks? His eyes slowly closing, he wonders if he was going to die. But even if he was, he says that there was nothing left for him to regret. After all, he had finally achieved his goal. The man loses consciousness. But not before long, he hears someone speaking. Suddenly, the man opens his eyes to a woman screaming at his face, yelling for him to wake up. Trying to gather his bearings and figure out where he was exactly, the woman is glad that he's finally awake and tells him to get ready quickly. She heads to the door and yells downstairs to her husband, letting him know that the man now named Kazuya had woken up. Kazuya looks out the door, following the woman, and in a spur of the moment, thinks about his dad. But he stops short, finally realizing where he was. He was at his parents' house, his mom and dad at the dining table. Kazuya quickly went to the bathroom. While washing his face, he was completely confused. Last he remembered, he had left his parents' house 10 years ago. When he looks up at the mirror above the sink, the face of a tired-looking young man stared back at him. Even now, he looks like he's seen better days. He stares at his reflection in horror, disbelieving that he was seeing right. All he could think about was how he was supposed to be 30 years old. But right now, he looked just as he did when he was in his teens. He suddenly turns around, hearing what seems to be the beginning of a special news report. Rushing to go back to the dining table, Kazuya watches as the news report talks about an ongoing subjugation of monsters that appeared in Shinjuku, Tokyo. Kazuya stands in the background, dumbfounded, as his mom and dad talk about how monsters have been appearing in the city more frequently, but they say that should the Adventurers Guild take care of it, then things should just be fine. Kazuya gapes, unable to process anything. What were his parents talking about? The news report carries on. Adventurers rank 3 and up were gathering from other prefectures, preparing to subjugate the monsters. Kazuya's parents are wondering if the monster has escaped from a training facility, but what really concerns them is how big the monster was. A terrifying animal-like monster stands in the middle of a ruined city street. The monster was an evil boar, a large boar-type monster. Its tusks were hard enough to pierce steel and were traded at high prices. The effort it took to name it Evil Boar is worthy of praise. Kazuya was impossibly and increasingly growing more confused by the second. Since when did monsters exist in his world? He goes back to his room, his old room, and asks himself what was going on. His hand lands on a stack of papers close by the door. It was a pamphlet for the Shizuoka Prefectural Swordsman First Middle School Enrollment Guide. Kazuya mumbles to himself as he reads the pamphlet that went on about swordsmen, magic, and support. He didn't seem to remember there being a game-like school right there in Japan. It seemed that in his current world, to be allowed to subjugate monsters, one had to study at a school. Judging from where the pamphlet had been, Kazuya guessed that he was about to enroll into the school. He sets the pamphlet down with a smile. He definitely had a lot to confirm and he wasn't quite sure why he came to that world, but he was going to take it one at a time. He smiles with barely suppressed glee and excitement at the thought that he might be able to become the Fist King again, just like in the game he played. But this time, it would be in this new monster-infested world. He clenches his fist in determination. Looking aside, he notices his phone. He picks it up, ready to gather intel. He finds out that he would be enrolling in a middle school. Truly, it's called the Swordsman First Middle School. What were you expecting? Looking up what the swordsman course he was going to take had to offer, he suddenly stops short at a certain page. According to the page, the Swordsman Middle School aimed for students to acquire certain skills in their respective courses over 3 years. Swordsman course had to learn Bash level 5, Magic course had to learn Fire Arrow level 5, and the Support course had to learn Heal level 5 and Cure level 1. Kazuya shakily reads aloud that the skills existed in the game he played. Apparently, if the world had the same settings as that in the game, the students would only be learning beginner skills. He continues to read, a terrified look in his eyes as he reads that he would be going to school for a whole 3 years. Lying face down on his bed, Kazuya laments that he didn't want to go to school, which is a completely relatable and rational reaction. He asks himself if there was even any point in going to school. With a weary sigh, he wonders how he can check his stats. Back in the game, he would have to just call out and the screen would come out at will. He takes in a sharp breath. At the top of his lungs, he screams for the status screen to open. I don't think that's supposed to be the face you make when you call out to something. When that doesn't work, he wonders if the words used to summon the screen are different, so he decides to scream for his status again using other possible commands. And by that, I mean he uses words that sound the same to the word status. Finally having enough of his screaming, his mom barges into his room before he can scream again. She more or less tells him to shut up. Awkwardly, Kazuya tries to ask her how to open his status window, and his mom, confused, asks him if he was talking about some game. He tries to backtrack, but his mom suddenly understands that he was talking about his skill sheet. She hands him a sheet of folded paper, telling him that he was going to submit that for the entrance ceremony, so he'd better not lose it. With a polite bow, he takes it from her. Both excited and nervous, he unfolds the paper and reads his stats. According to the skill sheet, Kazuya Sato had Stamina Recovery up level 2, Sword level 2, and Gun level 1, and additionally stat levels that were not something to brag about. I suppose Kazuya realized that too. He looks at his skill set with horror and disbelief. His weapon proficiencies were too low, and he only had the Stamina Recovery up as a skill. He's so focused on the skill sheet that he doesn't notice his dad entering the room. Kazuya slowly spirals and continues to panic as he wonders if he'll even be able to enter the middle school with scores as low as that. His dad tries to comfort him, telling him that if he went to school, he'd be able to learn more skills. Kazuya's dad wishes him good luck, but Kazuya grits his teeth. Even if this world had similarities to his game world, his current skills were those of a total beginner. The idea of becoming the Fist King would be a dream within a dream. Even trying to beat small fry monsters in this new world would be impossible, much more defeating bosses or clearing dungeons. Dejectedly, Kazuya asks his dad if it was even possible for him to get stronger. There were monsters, dungeons, skills, and magic everywhere, and yet he was weak. Kazuya would have said more about going to the school, but his dad cuts him off. His dad tells him that things were going to be okay. After all, Kazuya had already accepted his weakness, so that was the first step in becoming stronger, and from then on he said Kazuya would only grow stronger. Touched and newly resolute, Kazuya thanks his dad. With full conviction, he tells his family that he was going to get stronger. His parents look at him proudly. Kazuya's father comes up to him and hands him a flyer, telling him that starting the next day, he should head over to the place mentioned in the paper. When Kazuya reads it, it was the flyer for the grand opening of a training hall. The following day, as promised, Kazuya arrived at the training hall. Bursting with excitement, he couldn't help but exclaim how everything seemed like it was a game world. He gushed about how insane everything was, further hyping his excitement. "I know it's pretty cool, but tone it down a bit. You're making the rest of us look bad." As their training starts, an old man that seemed to be the coach of the training hall announces that those 15 years and younger, rental weapons would be free. Kazuya chose to go with a wooden mace. Fighters of all kinds gathered at the hall, using wooden swords as they fought wooden dummies. Kazuya and other beginners, on the other hand, started off with a practice log. Quite literally just a piece of thick wood. According to Kazuya's skill sheet, a swordsman should only be able to acquire sword-related skills, but that's not quite his case. He stood in front of the log, readying his mace. In Kazuya's skill sheet, it included that he had an affinity for gun-type skills as well, something that should have been impossible to have together. Meaning, although there were job classifications in this world, there were no in-game restrictions on acquiring skills. Having thought all of that through, he had come up with the best skill he wanted to acquire in the shortest time possible. He pulled his mace back and swung it at the log as strong as possible. If he raised his proficiency enough in healing magic and maces, he reasoned he would get a physical ability boost, spoken like a true online game addict. Hyping himself up, he swings the mace over and over. 8 hours later, he smashes through logs again and again, yelling for himself to learn how to heal. He really likes yelling things repeatedly, huh? He suddenly stops, breathing hard. He wonders if maybe praying to heal himself wasn't going to be enough. Feeling more exhausted, his grip on the mace slips from the blood on his palms. However, he stops again. He stares at his hands in amazement as they seem to glow ever so softly. The bleeding in his palms had stopped. I can't believe all that yelling worked. He looks at his newly calloused hands, now free from blood, unable to quite believe that he really was able to heal now. The skin of his calloused hands that had formed over the 8 hours of training were also beginning to heal, but not completely. Kazuya figures that he had just ran out of mana. He looks up at the clock, noting that he had been training for hours, and yet he felt like he had swung the mace more than he could have with his current stamina. He reasons he might have learned healing earlier in the middle of his training. As he leaves, he ruminates how although his mana capacity was a problem, the next skill he should be acquiring was a physical ability boost. Time passes by quickly and it's a week later. As Kazuya continued his training, other people in the training hall had started to talk about him. They were whispering about him just continuously hitting the log until closing time. He had been hitting it for 8 hours a day for a whole week straight. They think he might have even been possessed with the rate he was going. They couldn't understand what his purpose was. But for Kazuya, he had finally confirmed something in the past week. This new world was structured by inheriting game settings to a certain extent. Meanwhile, whatever knowledge he had gained from playing the game could be used in this world. At this point, he had successfully learned physical ability boost and could swing the mace around for a full hour. Looking resolute, he planned on getting mace proficiency up to level 10. He's thinking of the possible results of his training when he's snapped out of his thoughts by something passing by. Something was apparently a young girl, her hair up in a ponytail. Kazuya watches as the girl swung her sword at a wooden dummy. He notices that beside her stood a man and wonders if it was her father. He suddenly thinks of how his own father only played games all the time, so maybe being a gamer was something in his blood. Turning back around, he decided that he had had enough of trying to smash logs, so he was going to try creating sculptures. I understand making things with a sword, but how are you going to make sculptures with a whole mace? The girl watches Kazuya leave, commenting how odd he was. However, the man beside her finds Kazuya's choice of using a mace rather interesting. As they watch him train, the man says that Kazuya was practicing hard, but for the girl, he looked like he was just playing around. The man agrees to some degree, but he adds that Kazuya's eyes had the look of someone who was seriously dedicated to something, the bright smile on Kazuya's face adding to the man's observations. He adds that Kazuya would get stronger, and that he was the type of person that didn't care what others thought of him. The girl merely replies with a soft sigh of contempt as she continues to watch. Suddenly, Kazuya yells to swing without tensing up. However, the mace ends up slipping through his fingers as the girl remains quiet at the spectacle. Another week passes. Kazuya slams his mace down on a wooden statue of what looked like Cerberus. However, he swung too harshly and the wooden statue turned to wooden splinters in seconds. Kazuya wails in dismay at having destroyed a statue that was close to completion. He mourns that the same thing has happened before. He throws himself to the ground, piles of discarded wood and barely finished statues. Kazuya wails that he couldn't finish any of it, crying that the task was way too hard. Despite trying for a whole week to make a single statue, he had failed at every turn. Internally, he started to wonder if his mace proficiency was going up in the first place, but he did reach the point where he could use the mace without much effort. The girl from before watched as Kazuya got up. Seeing him work hard, she tells herself that she can't lose to him. As he's thinking of changing his practice method, Kazuya bends down to grab another log. However, he ends up dropping it. Seeing it quickly roll away, Kazuya notices that it was headed straight for the girl. He yells in alarm, shouting at her to watch out, and it successfully catches her attention. The girl turns around in time to see the log barreling towards and she screams. Kazuya rushed in without a second to lose and threw up his mace. With a resounding crash, he slams the log straight to the ground with a hit far too strong. It left both him and the girl speechless. A silence passes through them, the dust clearing with Kazuya's mace creating a crater around the broken log. With amazement, Kazuya stares at the mace in his hands, thoughts running wild. The power he used, the attack range, there was no doubt about it. The skill he had just used was something you get from a mace level 5 bash. With a proud grin, he swings the mace, happy that his mace proficiency has gone up and validated to him that his training wasn't a waste at all. Snapping out of his thoughts, he notices the girl staring at him blankly. He awkwardly calls out to her, asking if she was all right. However, all the girl could think how Kazuya really was just a weird kid. Clearly, there's some truth to her words. Kazuya and the girl are sitting at one of the benches outside the training hall. She introduces herself as Karen Tanya. She mentions that she will be a third year at First Swordsman Middle School, the same school as Kazuya, starting in April. Karen holds out a soda can that she bought from the nearby vending machine to Kazuya. With a nervous expression, Kazuya gratefully takes the can of soda, referring to her as Senior Tanya in respect. Karen laughs heartily, teasing him for calling her Senior Tanya. However, she continues that if he really was ever in trouble, he could just let her know anytime. Ooh, nice, you got upperclassmen connections now. Great start. She honestly admits that she had been meaning to talk to him for a while now. Rather shocked, Kazuya makes sure if she meant him. Karen notes how Kazuya was in the training hall every day without fail, smashing through logs with his wooden bat, which is the mace he uses to practice with, for more than 8 hours each day. She tells him that he was basically known as a local celebrity in the training hall at that point. She continues that he could even use Bash before he started middle school. Kazuya bashfully admits that he was only able to use Bash, pun not intended, that very same day, and Karen exclaims in surprise. According to her, it takes 3 years to learn the skill in middle school. Kazuya awkwardly agrees that she was right. Karen tells him that that was simply proof of all his hard work. With a determined smile, she tells him that she needed to step up on her own game. As Karen takes a sip of her own soda, Kazuya takes the momentary pause to change subjects. He asks her if there was ever a place where he could swing a mace with all his might, adding that as much as possible it would be a place he could visit for free. Apparently, he's been using his allowance to buy the logs, but Kazuya says it's been difficult getting more funds, thinking back on his conversation with his mom. He tried asking for more money from her to buy logs, but she's rather doubtful that he really was just using them for that. Karen thinks about the training hall's rental house and its price board and agrees that though they come cheap, buying materials over and over would make the costs add up. With a gloomy look on his face, Kazuya grumbles how he really couldn't get stronger if he was broke. Karen pauses for a while to think before an idea pops up in her head. Karen suggests that he could try slaying monsters in certain areas with monster nests. Kazuya immediately couldn't help but think about games with characters wearing armor and fighting gear, slashing at monsters that surrounded them. With an excited look on his face, Kazuya holds on to Karen's phone as she shows him a map. Apparently, he would be able to find a slime nest in the forest in the next town over. Overly excited eyes read the words, Shizuoka Prefecture Slime Habitat List, on the phone screen. Karen was saying that he would be perfectly safe taking the slimes down since he was already able to use Bash. But Kazuya was barely hearing anything in his focused state. He doesn't even register Karen telling him to make sure to go with a parent or a guardian to the forest. Kazuya was lost in his thoughts, still thinking about slaying monsters. It was something that he did all the time in games to level up and earn gold. And now, he would be able to do that in reality. As he snaps out of his thoughts, he catches Karen's words when she warns him not to go too far into the forest, or else he would run into horned rabbits. Time passes, and in a forest a group of slime linger around the forest floors. However, their lives don't last long when a wooden bat smashes them into pieces. Kazuya was smashing into slimes at a rapid pace, absolutely thrilled and yelling how awesome the whole experience was. That honestly does look like fun though, like whack-a-mole, but they're alive. He had asked the man in the rental house for the wooden bat. While in the forest, Kazuya planned on getting real combat experience, leveling up his skills and earning some money, all at the same time. There's a wicked grin on his face as he thinks of how he was going to hit 3 birds with 1 stone. 2 hours pass in the forest and Kazuya breathes out a tired sigh as he rests on a rock. He decided that he had enough fighting for the day. A little exhausted but nonetheless fulfilled, he holds up a heavy bag of all the slim cores he had gathered thanks to a 100% drop rate. Kinda nasty thinking about all those slime parts, not gonna lie. All he really needed from the trip was to scout the place out, so it was time for him to head back for the meantime. Muttering to himself that he needed a bigger and sturdier sack for next time, he gets up and starts walking away. However, nearby bushes rustle and catch his attention. Kazuya nervously looks at the bushes and comes face to face with an angered horned rabbit. Quite the accurate and effortless name. It's not wrong, just very straight to the point. It was the very monster Karen had warned him about, and just as she said, he must have wandered too far into the forest. He raises his wooden bat as the horned rabbit gets into position. In the next second, the rabbit lunges, horn aimed right at him. Kazuya raises the wooden bat. With a powerful swing, he brings the bat down and slams it to the ground, but the horned rabbit leaps away just in time, dodging his attack. He grits his teeth in panic, the rabbit's speed completely catching him off guard. Before he knew it, the rabbit had already run behind him, horn ready to attack once more. Kazuya compares its speed to the slime's, noting that it was on a whole other level. It was almost unreal. He strategizes that a vertical swing would prove hard to land a hit on the monster, so he makes up his mind and adjusts his hold on the bat. He yells as he bashes at the horned rabbit with a horizontal slash. It successfully hits and the horned rabbit hits the ground. But the attack was too shallow and all it did was make the rabbit angrier, its eyes glaring daggers at him. The horned rabbit rushes towards him again. However, what Kazuya failed to take into account was the distance between him and the monster after it landed on the floor. The rabbit lunges again and Kazuya barely has any time to react. He raises his arms, at least hoping to counterattack, but even then he won't make it. The rabbit's horns are nearing him, aimed straight at his face for a killing blow. In panicked desperation, Kazuya forces his body to move. He throws his body back to dodge. The horned rabbit hits, but only barely, as its horn grazes the side of his body. Kazuya stumbles from the injury, gritting his teeth as the pain kicks in. He reminds himself that he wasn't in a game and that this world wasn't a game world. It was his reality now, and he could get hurt just as easily. He holds up a hand to his torn clothes and his fresh wound and forces himself to heal. Damn, if you didn't have that, you would have been a goner. His wound slowly mending, he goes back to the battle with determined focus. He observes the horned rabbit and remarks that although it was only a low-leveled enemy monster, its attack speed was insanely high. If he didn't land a clean enough hit, then he was done for. Please don't die, you're literally in the middle of the forest and no one will find you. With its teeth bared, the rabbit rushes forward one more time at Kazuya. It leaps into the air as Kazuya raises his bat, his eyes focused on its every movement as it grew closer. Kazuya just needed it to come as close as possible. The horned rabbit screeches, its long horn just inches away from his stomach. Kazuya grits his teeth in terrified determination. With a wholehearted yell, he slams the bat down as powerful and as swiftly as he could. Unable to stop its attack mid-jump, the rabbit takes the hit completely. It coughs out blood, receiving a deadly blow. Kazuya breathes heavily, praying the horned rabbit doesn't move again. He continues to raise his bat in front of him in a fighting stance, ready to counter-attack. But it doesn't move again. He slowly mumbles to himself, almost disbelieving that he really did beat it. His hand goes to the wound from earlier, now closed because of his healing. He thinks of other possibilities of how the battle might have gone. If he had mistimed the attack by even a fraction of a second, the rabbit's long horn would have pierced through him completely and killed him. That's a horrible image, yikes. He finally relaxes and goes to pick up his loot for the day. As he opens up another sack and kneels for the horned rabbit, he thinks to himself how this world simply looked like a game. But that's where it ended. He made up his mind that he needed to change his whole mindset. Getting on his bike, he sets down another sack on the basket. It was the dead body of the horned rabbit. Kazuya thought he should probably take it with him. From what he remembered, Karen had mentioned how he could cache the monster drops, the slime cores, and now the corpse of a horned rabbit at the ward office. After that, for a full week, Kazuya hunted for slime's nests in the forest from morning until night. He got the occasional rabbit every now and then, but all the same, he cached them in at the ward office. Walking away from the monster subjugation division at the ward office, Kazuya had a gleeful smile as he held his earnings. Within a week, he had made nearly 100,000 yen in total. For context, this would amount to around 600 USD, and to that I say, that's a whole lot of money in a week. With his new routine, Kazuya thought fighting monsters was way more fun than only training at the training grounds. I mean, when you earn that much money, it would definitely be fun. For his next goal, Kazuya wanted to get his hands on a new skill sheet. It was an item that lets someone check their acquired skills at home. So for another whole week, Kazuya kept on hunting every day, trying to save up for the skill sheet. Finally, he was at the ward office once more. The woman at the counter thanks him again for his hard work and tells him that they were always grateful for all the monsters he had subjugated. That's definitely a lot of monsters if he does it every day. The woman slid a sheet of paper across the counter. It was the skill sheet Kazuya was saving up for, now in his hands. The woman tells him that he just needed to put a single drop of blood inside the small frame at the corner of the paper. Once he does that, the sheet should display all the skills he currently possesses. Kazuya thanks her with a smile, but the woman claps her hands together and tells him that the office was more thankful to him. Apparently, all the items he's brought over the past 2 weeks were a huge help to the ward office. She continues that they hadn't had anyone bring in over 20 kilograms of slime cores every single day. More than 20 kilograms of slime cores daily is crazy work. How fast was he killing them? She even tells him that he was quite the celebrity around those parts. First the training hall and now the ward office, he was basically famous everywhere. Kazuya laughs bashfully at her words when 2 people come up behind him. A familiar voice calls out from behind him and Kazuya freezes in horror. He turns to see his mom and dad, almost as startled as him and unable to believe that it really was him there in the ward office. Kazuya hesitantly asks them what in the world they were doing there. Kazuya stands before his parents. Completely serious, his dad tentatively asks Kazuya to tell him the truth. His dad grabs him by the shoulders, demanding to know if he was having money problems. Well, that escalated fast. Shocked and rather confused, Kazuya stumbles in his words as he tries to answer. His dad keeps going. Apparently, he's heard a rumor going around that there was a kid who brings in 20 kilograms of slime cores every day. After it piqued his curiosity, he took a peek at the counter and there was Kazuya, happily handing out the bag of slimes to the woman at the counter. He demanded to know where Kazuya got all the slime cores. Proudly, Kazuya answers that he had defeated all the slimes himself. With complete anger and disbelief on his face, his dad yells that Kazuya was lying and that there was no way he could have possibly done so with the skills that he had. Wow, way to ruin a kid's confidence. I thought you believed in him. Very much hurt and angered by his accusation, Kazuya walks out even as his dad tries to call him back. He tells him that if his father wasn't going to believe him, then that was that, which is a completely valid reaction. Kazuya's mom watches the exchange in silence. That night, back in his room, Kazuya mumbles to himself that it appears nothing really has changed. As he goes through his files on a desk, he mutters how even when he was reborn in another world, even after he came back from death, he thinks of his old life and how his father remained the same as always, still accusing him of the same old things. He pauses and wonders to himself if there really was anything different about him from before, too. He tells himself that he was ready for the entrance ceremony the next day, his uniform already set in the closet. All that was left was the skill sheet he bought that day. He goes through the file, skill appraisal complete written on the paper. As he reads it, he thinks about how his suspicions were confirmed. All his acquired skills, stamina recovery up, physical ability up, bash, magic power recovery up, were at level 10 while heal was at level 3. For weapon proficiency, sword was at level 2, gun was at level 1, but mace was at level 10. Even his stats had grown a certain amount. Kazuya thinks about how it didn't take him 3 years to acquire a new skill. At the First Swordsman Middle School, students aim to acquire one skill over 3 years through practical training and classwork. However, in reality, in this world, all you have to do to get a new skill is to raise your weapon proficiency. Kazuya wonders how no one has ever figured the tactic out, but he grins in his excitement because that just truly confirmed things for him. He would be able to use everything he had learned in the game world in this new world. Kazuya looks at his stats and tells himself that at the rate he was going, it would be possible for him to become the ultimate fist king he always dreamed of becoming. He pauses, a slightly frustrated but resolute look coming to his face as he mutters that in this world, he would even be able to show his dad what he was truly capable of. He promises to himself that he will get stronger little by little. The next day, he arrives at the entrance ceremony with his mom. Cherry blossoms are in full bloom and students linger all over in their uniforms. Wearing the school uniform as well, looking sharp, bro. Kazuya's face is red as he asks his mom what she was going to do with all the photos she was taking. Kazuya stood in front of a banner that welcomed the new students as his mom took countless photos. According to her, it was her son's big day, so of course she needed photos, and then she told him that she needed to take a little more. Kazuya sighs as he looks up. Before him stood the school building in all its glory, and Kazuya commented how huge it was. As he and his mom walk to the assembly hall, she opens up the conversation about the day before and tells him that his dad was only worried about him. Only slightly frustrated, Kazuya replies after a pause that he knew. His mom smiles, content with his answer. They entered the assembly hall just as the ceremony was about to start. The ceremony starts, and up on the stage stood a young lady. She begins by saying congratulations to all the new students for their enrollment. She introduces herself as Karen Tanya, the student council president. Internally, Kazuya thinks of how he knew that Karen would be enrolling in the same school. However, he didn't know she was the student council president. He thinks about how she had a completely different air about her than she did at the training grounds. Kazuya watches with amazement as Karen starts to talk about how in their next 3 years in the school, the students would be facing many trials. She continues that, through it all, the students would be helping each other, and they would grow by learning from one another. They would be learning in class and in mock battles, helping each other patch up after fights. Karen goes on to say that by never giving up and continuing to believe in themselves, they would all become strong and dependable adventurers. She smiles softly as she says that she would be praying for the day where they will all become adventurers who save the world and be loved by all. And with a bow, she concludes her welcoming address. Kazuya and the rest of the assembly hall burst into a round of applause. As he watches her leave the stage, he thinks with pride of how Karen really got things together. Karen notices him in the crowd as she passes by and greets him with a grin and a peace sign that leaves Kazuya and those around him shocked and blushing. A man at the stage clears his throat to call for everyone's attention. The man introduces himself as Todoroki, the principal of First Swordsman Middle School. He starts off by asking if the students were aware of the school's appraisal system. Kazuya exclaims at the information, completely caught off guard. Principal Todoroki continues that in the middle school, where the students aim to acquire skills over 3 years, they had a full-time dedicated skill appraiser in the staff. As he speaks, a man walks onto the stage. Principal Todoroki introduces the beautiful man as Mr. Ujihara, the school's resident appraiser. He was so pretty I seriously mistook him for a woman. My bad. As Ujihara greets the audience, the principal reveals that he had called for him in the entrance ceremony to hold a special skill appraisal session for the new students. With an excited grin, Todoroki challenges any student who thinks they had what it took up to the stage. In the sidelines, the student council members mutter to themselves about what they called the principal's freshman hazing. One of them comments that there was no way a new student would have a skill before they even entered the school. Ha ha, oh boy. The principal suddenly points to the crowd and calls for a young male. The young man starts to panic at the thought of going on stage. However, the principal was pointing at Kazuya, who sat right beside the other male. Kazuya, hand raised, asks if he could borrow a weapon. The principal holds a dark, gleeful smile as he takes interest in the sudden challenge, and he tells Kazuya that he may borrow a weapon from the school's inventory. Kazuya's mom yells his name in shock and horror as Kazuya goes up to the stage and is handed a weapon by the school staff. Karen softly mutters his name, rather worried. Kazuya gets on stage and faces the skill appraiser Ujihara. Ujihara smiles warmly at Kazuya and apologizes, telling him that the principal was merely trying to light a fire under the new students. Meanwhile, the principal stood in the sidelines, muttering how things were getting started over and over with a rather worried expression. Kazuya reassures Ujihara that everything was fine and he was simply curious to see if his skill sheet was accurate, so the timing was perfect, which was a response that only made Ujihara confused. With a yell, Kazuya throws the sword back like he would with a mace, and with a terrifying aura and a resounding crack, he slams the weapon down on the ground in front of the appraiser. Ujihara looks on in stunned silence. All the students in attendance begin to mutter to themselves about the loud sound, all equally amazed and in disbelief. The principal comes forward and gives Kazuya a heavy pat on the back, joyously laughing that he was a youth full of vigor, with an exceptionally fine swing. As the principal continuously laughs at how Kazuya would be a celebrity in school the following day. At this point, he was a celebrity wherever he went. Kazuya seemed distracted as he looked at the sword in his hand. The principal turns to address Ujihara and apologizes that the current year's freshmen were still quite inexperienced. However, Ujihara softly calls him to attention, and the principal is forced to stop short. Ujihara tells the principal that the slash Kazuya just dealt was a bash level 2. There's a deafening pause before the principal explodes in disbelief and horror, making sure that the brat, he means Kazuya, really did have a skill, and already in level 2 at that. Refusing to believe it, the principal points to Kazuya and yells that until just the other day, he was nothing more than an elementary schooler. Just say you think he's too much of a child. He continues to yell that there was no way a kid like him could possibly already have a skill. Kazuya pauses, rather annoyed. Kazuya calls for Ujihara's attention as he raises his hand. Kazuya's hand starts to glow, scattering light all around the appraiser. Ujihara exclaims in disbelief that Kazuya had just used heal, which was also at a rather high level. Kazuya proudly says that there was more where that came from as he turns to the principal, who was slowly losing his patience. The principal finally snaps, shouting that Kazuya was simply messing with him. What is up with these adults and not believing kids? He continues that kids should just be kids and shut up and listen to what their teachers tell them, which is a horrifying thing for any educator to say, let's be honest. Just as he slams his fist into the podium, Kazuya raises his hand at the same time. The principal's hit does more damage than he meant to create, destroying the podium completely until the principal's fist met the ground. Ujihara stares, completely dumbfounded as the splinters of the wooden podium and the stage rain down on them. Kazuya had just used buff magic. As the principal stares in horror at the crater made by his own abilities, Ujihara wonders how many skills does Kazuya truly have. Kazuya lets out a sigh. The student council members stare in shock and Ujihara asks who Kazuya is, but he only has a triumphant smile on his face. The assembly hall burst into a commotion at Kazuya's display of abilities. Heal and bash, and on top of that, the ability to even buff magic. Every person in the audience below the stage were all asking the same question. Who in the world was Kazuya Sato? Seeing the crowd getting more restless, Ujihara decides to take control of the situation. He turns to Kazuya and asks him to come with him to another room for a moment. Kazuya raises an eyebrow, wary at the offer, but agrees anyway. Later on, they move into an office in the school. Ujihara pours tea into multiple teacups and serves them to his guests, which consist of Kazuya, his mom, and Karen. Ujihara starts by saying that he was truly astonished at the sudden information, never imagining a new student would have acquired 3 skills already before school even started. Kazuya takes a sip of his drink, his mom surprised at the skill appraiser's words. Ujihara turns to Karen and thanks her for her help, to which the girl tells him not to mention it as it was already quite the commotion. According to Ujihara, the principal wouldn't be able to make it to their small meeting since he was busy dealing with the other parents. Thankfully, the student council president Karen was able to offer some help. Kazuya's mom asks if anything happened that needed the student council and the principal's help, and Ujihara and Karen share a look. Apparently, all the other parents are saying they want to talk to Kazuya's guardians. His mom blinked in confusion before Ujihara explained. The parents wanted to ask about their educational methods for Kazuya, such as homeschooling and so on. Kazuya watched closely as his mother looked down, rather unnerved. You can almost hear the "I told you so" in his eyes. Ujihara continues that he took the liberty of looking at Kazuya's skill sheet. Karen blinks in disbelief as she hears that Kazuya's skill has already reached level 10. Kazuya asks why the skill appraiser had said that it was only level 2 when he demonstrated his skills up on stage, and Ujihara explains that it was likely due to the weapon proficiency. According to him, his bash skills level was most likely restricted because his proficiency with the weapon. In his case, the sword he borrowed from the school inventory was too low, since he usually used a club or his mace, and his club proficiency was trained to level 10. That meant he could use bash at its maximum potential while using onal. Kazuya remembered that games had a similar setting like that as well. Finally, Kazuya decides to bring up what the principal had mentioned beforehand. He had said that skill users can choose whether or not to attend the academy. Ujihara listens with focus, his face unreadable, as Kazuya says he wanted to take advantage of that information. With a grave expression on his face, he announces to the room that he wasn't coming to school. He wanted to get stronger at a faster rate. His mother calls out his name in concern and panic while Ujihara listens quietly, but Kazuya keeps going. His grip on his lap tightens as he says that he wanted to be able to defeat any monster by himself. He's snapped out of his thoughts when Ujihara calls out his name. Softly, he tells him that no one gets stronger on their own. Kazuya's eyes are sharp as he listens to Ujihara say that he was a hard worker that already acquired skills at his young age, but he was still maturing. Ujihara continues that he wants Kazuya to come to school and meet all sorts of different people. Kazuya frowns as the skill appraiser tells him that things would be okay, and he would be able to become even stronger. At the entrance to the school, Kazuya's mom and Ujihara let Kazuya know that they were just going to talk to the principal and then head home. They ask Kazuya to be careful on his way back as Karen moves on ahead. As a final note, Ujihara tells him that he'll see him at school, and Kazuya reluctantly agrees. Before his mom goes back to the main school building, she reminds him that they'll be having a talk as a family when they get home. Oh, that's definitely going to be one hell of a conversation, I can already tell. As Kazuya exits the gate, a figure in a skirt calls out his name. It was Karen. Apparently, she had waited for him to finish so they could walk home together. As they go through their neighborhood street, Kazuya hesitantly apologizes for the trouble he caused earlier that day. Karen reassures him that it was not trouble, she was just a little surprised. After a pause, she asks him again if he really didn't plan on coming to school. Kazuya admits that he wasn't sure and that he was going to talk about it with his parents first when they got home. However, he adds that he's determined to use his time to get stronger. Remembering his fight with the one-horned rabbit, it still bothered him that he could barely take it down when he fought it. Kazuya says the classes at school would take too long. He continues that listening to the teachers and seeing everyone's reactions made him realize just how desperate they are to learn how to acquire skills. He goes on in his tangent saying that if they had just tried training for 8 hours a day for a month straight, but he's suddenly cut off. Karen gives him a pointed look. She says that for everyone, that was just something that they can't do. They spent 3 whole years at the academy just to learn a single skill. Unlike Kazuya, who was able to learn so much in such little time, Karen continues that he's been working incredibly hard, but other people just couldn't do the same and get the same results. She clenches a fist, one with numerous cuts and scars from years of sword training. Kazuya softly tries to say something, but Karen claps her hands together in apology for suddenly saying some pretty weird things. Facing a different direction, she says that her home was that way. She turns the corner and bids him farewell until they meet again at school. Kazuya watches her leave with a blush. Later on that night at his house, Kazuya's parents finally ask him. They want him to confirm that the paper they were holding really was his skill sheet. Sitting across them from the table, Kazuya looks like a mix between annoyed and pissed as he answers that he bought the skill sheet using the money he earned from destroying slimes. His father asks again if his story from back then was true, and Kazuya, with barely covered up sass, asks if they believed him now. His father admits that he still couldn't believe it since Kazuya had just acquired so many skills in such a short amount of time. Just by hitting a log for 8 hours a day no less, I get that they have a right to be suspicious of his log-hitting abilities. But his mom deadass saw him pull off those skills in a school assembly? Did no one record it? Kazuya repeats that he did it for a month straight and that was all there was to it. His father repeats his words to him, still doubting him. His mom stays quiet during the talk, but his father keeps going. He grips tightly to the skill sheet when he admits to Kazuya that after what he heard that day, he was worried about him. He stopped playing games and started hunting slimes like he was a completely different person. Finally, his father asks again if the skill sheet was even real, and again I say he literally showed his abilities off in front of a skill appraiser? Kazuya asks if they were trying to say that he was lying and that he had made the skill sheet up himself. With regret, his father lowers his eyes and apologizes because he still couldn't believe it. With barely hidden anger, Kazuya grits his teeth, but then his father speaks up again. Because of that disbelief, he needed to see Kazuya's skills for himself. With full determination, Kazuya agrees. Time passes for the next few days. On a mountain range, a car drives down the winding roads and suddenly stops. Before them was a gate with the sign Izu Kogen Field on the front. A guard walks up to the driver's seat and asks for a certificate. Confirming that the paperwork was in order, the guard returns Kazuya's dad's certificate and goes to open the gate. Kazuya asks what that was for, and his dad answers that it was a graduation certificate from an adventurer school. He hands Kazuya the card. Holding the certificate, which looks more like an actual identification card, his dad explains that when someone hunts monsters in a field like the one they were entering, the party needs at least one member with this certificate as an escort. With barely concealed need to start a lecture, his dad settles to just saying that the certificate was the reason why amateurs can't just go hunting slimes in the woods on their own. With an awkward look on his face, Kazuya promises to be more careful. As the gate opens, Kazuya leans forward into his seat and up to his parents as he takes in the new view, unaware of the nervous look on his family's faces. Kazuya yells how amazing everything was as their car enters an open forest with gigantic trees and multiple life forms. They finally park the car and get off. Kazuya takes in the view as his parents let him know that they were putting their gear on. He raises his phone up to take a photo of a passing flying bird-like creature. He mutters to himself of how incredible everything was, unable to believe that a facility like that truly existed. As he looks up that the creature he took a photo of was a oni-horned gull. The creator sure loves their horned monsters. He thinks of how much faster he'll be able to level up in the fields. Hearing footsteps nearing him, he turns around as his parents ask him if he was ready. His parents stand behind him in complete tactical armor and armed with magical guns. They look like they just came straight out of a fantasy version of Call of Duty. His dad asks him again if he was fine with just a sword. Nervously holding onto his weapon, Kazuya agrees, although wondering if his parents could even move around in the armor they were wearing. With a serious and grave expression, his dad tells him that when fighting monsters, someone should always be fully equipped, and fighting with guns was the standard. Moving past him, he challenges Kazuya to see what he could really do with just a sword. His eyes resolute, Kazuya raises his sword and follows after his dad. Casting a worried glance over her shoulder, his mom tells him to be careful. As they walk deeper into the woods, canine-like monsters follow close behind them. Kazuya's father leads their group, Kazuya's mother beside him as they go deeper into the forest. His parents' guns are raised in alert. Kazuya's father gives him the rundown of what they'll do once they encounter a monster. Kazuya was meant to hide, stay perfectly still, and silence his breathing. He was to erase his presence as much as he can, and when the monster lets its guard down, Kazuya should finish it in a single strike. But when Kazuya's father glances at him, he noticed that Kazuya didn't seem to be listening. Kazuya waits before his whole body turns to something behind them. He gets a dark look in his eyes as he says that for a little while now, their group's being followed, much to his father's confusion. Deep in the path they've just passed, Kazuya could faintly hear footsteps. Almost immediately as he says that, his father takes position in front of him, gun raised. Kazuya informs him that there were around 4 of them, and more than that, there was no doubt that they had killing intent. A fanged creature growls. Just as Kazuya said, a pack of 4 wolf-like creatures come towards them. His father freezes for a second before focusing his gun again. He's taken down werewolves before in school training exercises. He readies a finger on the trigger. Kazuya's father fires at the wolves in a succession of shots, but they were way too fast. The wolves were closing in fast and he was beginning to panic. Suddenly, he's caught off guard when Kazuya comes up in front of him and raises the gun in his father's hands. Kazuya tells him to stop shooting and that this fight wasn't like his father's mock battles at school. Before he could stop him, his father calls out to Kazuya as he dashes forward into battle. From that day on, Kazuya's main goal was to raise his sword proficiency. With a single powerful slash of his sword, Kazuya cuts clean through the first werewolf. His father stares in shock, saying it was impossible that all Kazuya needed was a single strike to finish it off. Kazuya steps forwards, cornering the other wolves as they continue to growl but don't come closer. He raises his sword and provokes the wolves for suddenly being scared of him. With a dark grin on his face, he uses his taunt skill. The wolves lunge for him. Up until now, his enemies never attacked him on sight. I mean, you did just cast taunt on them, so it's not their fault completely that they're attacking you directly. But at that instance, these enemies are different. Their enemies at that moment were clearly looking at their group as prey. He slashes at the other wolves, catching one off guard, and when one comes close enough, he pierces it through the head. Right now, it was kill or be killed. He delivers the final blow to one more. This was a battle for their very lives. He pauses before there is a sudden sound from the earth. Behind him, vines start sprouting from the ground. More and more large vines burst from below them. As the whole plant-like creature appears, a mouth with pointed teeth turns to him. It was a mandragora. The mandragora makes gurgling sounds as his father tells him to run. His father realizes what the monster was trying to do as the mandragora seemed to prepare. With an echoing screech, more vines burst from the ground. Mandragoras tend to call their allies for help. Kazuya stands before them, his sword raised. His father yells behind him that they had to get away for now, reasoning that they wouldn't be able to take on those numbers. But Kazuya rushes forward, giving himself a physical power boost. The Mandragoras are just as surprised as his father at his sudden burst in speed. Kazuya slashes at the Mandragora's vines recklessly, cutting through them easily as the monsters scream. The monster lunges for him, but Kazuya delivers one more blow to its vines and the head comes clean off. Kazuya's father stares dumbfounded and asks him hesitantly if he already knew how to defeat the Mandragoras. Kazuya jumps into the air and continues to make quick work of the plant-like monsters. It was just like the original game. The best way to beat the monsters is to take them out before they emerge from the ground. With a small triumphant smile, he decides that 2 hits with Bash would be enough to take care of his enemies. Suddenly, Kazuya pauses as he hears a terrifying roar. It was from behind him. In front of his parents stood a bear almost 4 times larger than them. It was a grizzly. The impressive monster names are back, I see. His parents stare, completely caught off guard, wondering what a monster like the grizzly was doing so close to the edge of the forest. The bear-like monster raises a large clawed paw and goes for an attack. Seeing that they were in danger, Kazuya leaps into action and takes the hit head-on. Its paw completely clashes into him, hitting him at the side of his body. It sends him flying into a tree. As his parents call out to him, the grizzly follows after him. It picks him up by his collar and throws him into the air. The bear opens its mouth. The grizzly catches him in its mouth, Kazuya's leg hanging for a split second before the grizzly completely swallows him whole. I hope this description wasn't too much. Whoops! His parents stare in absolute terror, unwilling to believe it. His mother lets out a horrified wail, but suddenly the bear chokes. The bear lets out pained roars as wounds appear from its body, one after another. Maybe that bear shouldn't have swallowed him whole if it wanted to live. To finish it off, a large slash is made across its body, cutting it open from the inside. Kazuya staggers forward from the corpse. He mumbles to himself, surprised that a grizzly showed up out of nowhere. The grizzly completely falls to the ground as Kazuya walks over to his parents. His very much traumatized parents, for sure. Saying that he let his guard down a little, he holds out a hand up to his chest, making small pain sounds as he heals his wounds quickly. Looking back up at his parents, he tells them that he's glad that they're safe. Although he's covered in blood, with a proud grin, he asks them for their thoughts if he really had gotten stronger, brother. That is genuinely the least of your concerns. Something rushes forward and takes him into their arms, surprising Kazuya. Engulfing him in a crushing hug, his mother wails into his shoulder, overwhelmed with relief. Kazuya asks her what was wrong. Confused at her reaction, I'm impressed by how out of touch he is right now. As she continues to wail, his father comes closer to them. He reaches out a hand towards him. Kazuya's father puts his hand on his head and ruffles his hair. Sobbing almost as badly as Kazuya's mother, he expresses how thankful he is that he was safe. At the sight, Kazuya's eyes start to water, his emotions welling up. Pretty sad that this is probably the first time he's felt like that with his family. All of them are on the ground in a tight hug. Kazuya's father tells him that he's gotten so strong. In school, classes have officially started. Karen Tanya from class 3-5 stands before her classmates and Mr. Ujihara. With all her might, Karen swings a wooden sword down into the ground. Ujihara smiles as he marks down her skills on a clipboard. Karen's sword proficiency is steadily rising, however. She has yet to acquire any skills. The group of students flood back into the main school building. One of Karen's friends delivers a hard slap to her back in congratulations for her proficiency shooting up, and Karen sarcastically thanks her. Looking at her bandaged hands sadly, Karen wonders when she'll be able to learn a skill. Her friend casually tells her that it was only the start of their 3rd year, so they could just take it easy for now, and Karen agrees. In front of them, a group of guys are talking about a new student. They say he's already learned a skill and he's self-taught, not to mention that he even took down a grizzly. Karen listens as the group says that apparently the new student hasn't come to school since. If it isn't obvious yet, they're talking about Kazuya. They say that it really was all about talent. Karen stares blankly with barely suppressed emotions. The group laughs, saying it was so unfair, and it must be nice not having to need to go to school. Unable to hold it in any longer, Karen cuts in on the conversation and defends Kazuya. She tells them that he works harder than anyone in the school, and that they shouldn't just write him off like that. The group apologizes, but it's obviously half-hearted as they say that it really was true that Karen didn't like people talking badly about her crush. Oh, they got you there. Karen's whole face goes completely red. The group starts running away, laughing as they go. Karen tries to stop them, but there's no point. They just laugh that what they heard about Karen and Kazuya was true. As a final note, they say that they were rooting for her and they were on her side. I guess it's nice that they're supportive. Karen and her friend are left behind, while her friend is barely holding in her laughter. Karen's face is still a shade of red as she asks if there were rumors spreading about her and Kazuya. In another part of the school, Kazuya's head turns to the side. His father, who was sitting beside him, asks if there was something wrong, but Kazuya rubs the back of his neck, answering that he simply felt like someone just called his name. They joke that it made sense since he was basically a celebrity now. Across from Kazuya and his parents is Principal Todoroki and Mr. Ujihara. His father starts the conversation by saying that they want to discuss Kazuya's future again. With input from Ujihara, they've formalized the school's official policy. His father apologizes for how long it took for them to decide, to which the principal kindly brushes off. Kazuya's father explains that their delay was due to them being in the Izu field the other day. Gravely in disbelief, the principal accepts that the story behind Kazuya taking down the grizzly was true. There's a pause as Kazuya's father says that he and his wife have talked it over. With a smile, he tells them that they've decided to let Kazuya do what he wants. His mother looks on with a similar smile while Kazuya turns to them, dumbfounded by their words. His mother admits that until she saw her son fighting with her own eyes, she was still a bit skeptical, but he's already at a level beyond their influence. Kazuya blushes lightly as his father puts a hand on his head. Not only that, but it was the first time they ever saw their son so passionate about something. Kazuya's father admits that it might just be foolish parental pride, but seeing Kazuya in action made him so happy. Kazuya lowers his head further to hide his embarrassment, but his parents laugh it off. Kazuya motions for his father to move his hand away as Ujihara and Todoroki watch them. Suddenly, the principal slides something towards them on the table, saying that his parents' decision should make things much simpler. It was a sheet of paper with the curriculum plan compiled by the school council. The main point of the proposed plan was that attending classes would be made voluntary for him, and the school would give him a letter of recommendation to the Shizuoka Adventurers Guild. His family reads through the paper, focusing on his free attendance for all classes and the letter. Their reactions are varied, his parents in disbelief while Kazuya is elated. But Kazuya suddenly asks about the guild. The principal tells them that he understood their surprise, but they believe that letting Kazuya join the guild is the best path for him as an adventurer. Kazuya's mother suddenly panics, reasoning that he was only 12 and he was just in elementary school until just recently. Principal Todoroki admits honestly that there are no middle schools in Japan that can accommodate Kazuya's needs. That's such a flex that he's the first, but also kind of bad that no school is prepared to handle cases like him. Todoroki reasons that they believe that Kazuya joining the guild is the best way to nurture his talent. His parents are still hesitant, but Kazuya is resolute, saying that surely if he goes there, he'll be able to get stronger. His father sighs, resigned. He smiles at Kazuya and tells him to do as he wishes. Kazuya excitedly thanks him, but before he could get ahead of himself, his father makes him promise to come home for dinner every single night. Kazuya agrees and things are settled. Things are set to take place the following Sunday. Later on, in the Shizuoka Adventurers Guild, adventurers of all kinds gather. With glittering eyes, Kazuya exclaims in excitement. He enters the guild hall, commenting how, in the original game, he only came there to accept quests. Kazuya looks around him with all the adventurers going around, observing all the people with different kinds of gear. He decided that he didn't really need any armor. This guy is a walking flex lol. Suddenly he's stopped by a woman holding a broom. She asks him if he was lost. Kazuya apologizes and hands her a piece of paper. The custodian thinks he was returning something that she had dropped, but Kazuya corrects her. He properly introduces himself and hands over his letter of recommendation from his school to become an adventurer. Every adventurer close enough to hear their conversation whips around to look at them. Your celebrity status continues to grow, Kazuya. They stare in disbelief, murmuring amongst themselves. The custodian awkwardly asks if there was some kind of mistake. Suddenly, her name is called. The voice apologizes to her, letting her know that Kazuya was his guest. Shimizu, the custodian, calls him the guildmaster. A man walks up to Kazuya and Shimizu. Apparently, Principal Todoroki had told him about Kazuya. He introduces himself as Jinai, the guildmaster of Shizuoka. They move to a better place to talk. Jinai states that he's heard that Kazuya has already acquired skills, amazed that he's already had as many as 3. Kazuya gets straight to the point and tells him that he came to the guild because he heard that he could get stronger. He asks to take on quests. Jinai laughs, praising Kazuya for his spirit. Kazuya listens with complete focus. Jinai continues that they've had a surge in monster incidents as of late, so they've got more work than they could handle, so he was always happy to have more talented people join their ranks. But he suddenly gets a dark smile on his face as he point-blank tells Kazuya that putting a child with a bright future in harm's way is something the adventurers must never do. Without backing down or showing weakness, Kazuya says that he wasn't a child. Jinai tells him that he had the air of a little old man about him, which surprises Kazuya. But Jinai was only kidding with him, was he though? Jinai suddenly brings up that Kazuya had an injury on his ribs, surprising Kazuya even more. The guildmaster asks if he got the wound from his fight with the grizzly. Kazuya frowns lightly since no one else had noticed his wound, all except for Jinai. Meanwhile, the guildmaster laughs carelessly as the custodian Shimizu hits him with a tray. Going back to the conversation, Janai tries to persuade Kazuya, saying that life wasn't a game. Funny you say that. When someone dies, they actually die. That's why someone had to do everything they could so they could lower the risk of dying before taking on a challenge. A true adventurer protects themselves and their comrades. Janai says that Kazuya was a little lacking in that department. But Janai says that there was no point in an old guy like him just lecturing him. He takes out a piece of paper. Instead of saying no to Kazuya outright, he was going to give him a test. Kazuya is confused. Janai explains that if he can take on a quest without any issues, Kazuya will officially be an adventurer. Kazuya readily and excitedly agrees. However, Janai adds that he was assigning him a support partner. Kazuya tries to tell him that he works alone. Before he could say anything more, an armored fist came into contact with his head. That could have straight up killed him, I think. Kazuya holds his head in his hands in pain as a woman tells him not to get cocky, also calling him a brat. I feel like that's important. Janai introduces the woman as the guild's dismantling specialist, Miss Oda Mao. I honestly have no idea what she's supposed to be dismantling. Maybe heads with the way she almost pummeled Kazuya's. Annoyed, Oda expresses her disdain for another pain-in-the-ass job dumped on her. Kazuya is surprised with her rudeness. Janai then continues. He hands over a sheet of paper to Kazuya with a picture of a bird-like monster. His quest was a cockatrice subjugation. Shimizu is worried that the quest may be too dangerous, especially since Ota was only in charge of dismantling. Maybe dismantling means butchering the monster? I still don't know. Janai is confused with their hesitation because one look at Kazuya and his glittering eyes as he read over the quest details, anyone could tell he was already raring to go. He hugs the sheet of paper to his chest in complete bliss, while Oda looks at him and calls him a weirdo. A cockatrice has the body of a rooster from head to feet. However, its tail is like that of a snake. Every one of them is about 2 or 3 meters tall and they're extremely ferocious. Janai smiles as he points to the quest info. He tells Kazuya that he'll consider the test passed upon the subjugation of a single specimen, knowing Kazuya. I think a single specimen is the minimum requirement, not the maximum. Later on, Ota wishes him good luck as their cart finally stops in the middle of a forest. Kazuya gets off the cart and takes out his gear. As he thanks Ota, she warns him that it wasn't too late for him to turn back since there was only cockatrice territory up ahead. Frowning, Kazuya tells her he understood, but he remains resolute. She keeps pushing that the place they were at wasn't a place for a kid to be playing around in, especially since he was dressed without armor. She asks if he has a death wish, and Kazuya frowns with barely suppressed anger. He turns around and pointedly says that since Ota wasn't fighting, she should just keep quiet. Ota is pissed, but so is Kazuya as he tells her to just carve the cockatrice quietly. Both of their anger is justified, not gonna lie. However, although Ota's comes from concern, the delivery is definitely lacking LOL. Ota moves to give Kazuya another hit to the head, but he tells her to be quiet one more time as he focuses on something below them. He'd spotted a whole flock of cockatrice. Ota starts giving him a plan to lure one of them out, but before she could continue, Kazuya leaps from the cliff. Ota watches as he dashes down the cliffside and throws himself right into the flock with deadly focus. With complete precision, he slices the neck clean of a cockatrice. The dead body of the cockatrice drops and another one comes up to him, but for Kazuya it was moving too slowly. He lunges for it, piercing it just below its neck. His eyes are dark and focused. From above the cliff, Ota watches in amazement as Kazuya takes down 2 cockatrice in an instant. She's confused, questioning about what he is. As he slashes at the monsters, she even wonders why he seemed to be having so much fun. The cockatrice's weak point is its heart, which is protected by powerful chest muscles. The difficulty of the fight depends entirely on whether the opponent can get an attack through to the heart. A cockatrice blocks Kazuya, but he strategizes that if there was no opening, all he had to do was make one. He slashes wildly again and sends the cockatrice flying back. He breathes in and repositions the way he holds his sword. He plunges his sword right through the monster. Ota watches dumbfounded. Kazuya's knowledge and technique and even more of his skills are on par with a high-ranking adventurer, maybe even better. Kazuya swings at multiple cockatrice, beheading both roosters and snakeheads. Ota recalls a conversation at the guild hall. She repeats the instructions to support a 12-year-old kid. Arms crossed and a frown on her face, she refuses the quest and tells her conversation partner for them to go instead. They say that they would if they could, but they were tied up with another matter. Ota was talking to Janai. He opens up a newspaper and tells her that from what he heard, the kid was quite the prodigy. Janai adds that he'd love to have him in their guild. He passes the newspaper to Ota. It was open to a specific page about a grizzly with its stomach cut open. Oh, that's definitely quite the grisly sight, ew. The paper said the creatures were defeated by a sword and the quality of the materials were extremely high and expected to be traded at high prices. Jinai claims that Kazuya possessed some extraordinary power, but Jinai smiles and says that teamwork is essential in a guild, so he thought it best for Ota to assess him. He wanted to see if he was the kind of person they should let into the guild. Now Ota finds herself staring up at a pile of cockatrice corpses. She's unnerved, but beside her, Kazuya calls out that he was going to hunt a little more while she was carving them up. Oh, so I guess she's something like a butcher. Ota takes out a butcher knife and kneels down to the cockatrice. Close quarters combat without even using a gun. Someone could have 100 lives and it wouldn't be enough. Ota internally asks if there was anyone who could possibly keep up with Kazuya. She decided he would never make it in the guild and it was impossible. That was quite the harsh assessment. As she continues to work, she tells herself that she wasn't quite one to talk and would just report to Jinai of her observation. She suddenly stops, hearing a peculiar sound. She turns around to find herself surrounded by snakes. It was the cockatrice's tail. She watches them in horror as she remembers that even if the main bodies were deaf, the tails could move on their own. Ota glances at the cart behind her, seeing the gun she had left behind. She tells herself to calm down. Since the body was dead, she just had to think that it was similar to exterminating a snake. Suddenly, one of the snakes lunges for her, fangs bared. Ota freezes, but then someone yells for her to get back. With an echoing crash, Kazuya slams down from above, crushing the snakes. Ota exclaims in amazement as Kazuya holds up a crackling sword. His focus is suddenly wiped away from his face and replaced with excitement as he looks at his sword. The shockwave that enveloped his sword was no mistake. He had acquired a break attack. Ota stares speechless as Kazuya continues to celebrate that he could now take out enemies in droves. Suddenly realizing Ota was still on the ground, he apologizes for not dealing with the cockatrice's tails. His face is filled with concern as he asks if she was hurt. Ota blushes as she lets him know that she was fine, to which Kazuya replies with a smile. Ota is touched that Kazuya saved her, but in the next moment she's back to her old self and tells him that she could have handled it. But she's cut off when a cockatrice head falls beside her. Kazuya is rushing off into battle again. He just turns to her to grin, his eyes sparkling. Kazuya lets her know that there were more cockatrice left, so he was going to hunt them all down. My boy is about to commit a cockatrice genocide. He runs off, telling her he was going to have a bunch more for her to carve up. He leaves her completely in bliss. Ota watches him go with a blank face. She was completely sure that it was impossible for him to join the guild. A beheaded cockatrice corpse is placed on a table. Carefully plucked free from most of its feathers, Ota raises her blade up to her eyes before expertly slicing at its body. Before he knew it, Kazuya watched as large boxes labeled feathers and bones respectively were set in front of him. Finally, the meat was placed in another box and Ota sheathed her blade, saying that that was more or less it. Kazuya hypes her up, complimenting her for disassembling 35 cockatrice in such a short time. Excuse me, did he just say 35? Weren't you meant to kill like one or something? Ota smiles proudly, accepting his praise. Ota returns his praise, saying that he was pretty amazing too for killing all those monsters without even using armor. But Kazuya disagrees with her, saying that he still has a ways to go. He breaks down his fight, saying that he couldn't take them all down in a single hit yet. He needed to control his mana more effectively. And other things like regarding spacing, distance, and blood splatter, because I guess that mattered too. Kazuya's about to say that he'd also like to hunt a little more before they left, but Ota turns his idea down immediately, saying that they were going back to the guild right away. Kazuya tries to say that he can still fight, however Ota counters that his sword was already broken. He awkwardly looks away, saying that he'll pull through with guts somehow. Ota continues to argue with him, pointing out that not only did he have no weapon, but he was also out of mana. Kazuya nervously asks how she found out, but she just points out that of course he would run out after he used so much. Ota tells him to treasure his life more, that is if he wanted to join the guild. If he didn't, Ota tells him that he'd put himself and his comrades in danger. With a dark look in his eyes, Kazuya frowns at Ota, saying that all that mattered to him was getting stronger, and he didn't care about anything else, brother. How are you going to get stronger if you're dead? Make it make sense. Ota stares at him for a moment before she brushes him off and says that she can tell that he was going through his cringy phase. Oh, she got you there. As she picks up the crates of cockatrice parts, she repeats that they were going back. When they arrive in the guild hall, they're immediately met by yelling as Jinai and Shimizu are awestruck at the pile of boxes. They're amazed that it was a whole 35 cockatrices, not to mention they were all in good condition too. Jinai orders Shimizu to get them all on auction right away. Ota and Kazuya watch them, bothered by their exaggerated reactions. Ota tries to tell them to keep it down, but she's cut off when Jinai suddenly comes up to them and holds on to Kazuya's hands. With a completely glowing expression, Jinai announces that he passes the exam, and he would accept Kazuya as a rank 2 adventurer. Damn, he just sent you right into the big leagues. He joyously welcomes him to their guild. Kazuya stares at him, dumbstruck by everything. Jinai suddenly stands beside him and calls out to everyone in the guild, announcing that they had a new member. As the guild members start to crowd around Kazuya, Ota collapses to the floor, completely giving up on the rest. She's a mood though. Most likely the only brain cell in the guild from the looks of it. Eventually, she stands back up and says that it no longer had anything to do with her, so she was calling quits. She didn't like troublesome stuff like that. However, with a rather nostalgic expression, Kazuya also reminded her of someone else, so if she was honest, it was rather hard to watch. Even as Kazuya is surrounded by the other guild members, he peeks past them to find Ota. He didn't get to thank her yet. However, he's knocked out of his thoughts when a taller figure suddenly comes up behind him, complimenting him and asking if he really defeated all the cockatrices by himself. They say that he must have been the promising rookie they've heard of. As Kazuya turns around to look at them, the person makes him an offer. Before him was a group led by a man wearing armor. I learned from Mr. Ujihara, and by that I mean some of the men are designed so prettily I can't even tell what gender they are anymore. He offers for Kazuya to join their party. Kazuya steps back from him as the man explains that parties were groups that took on quests together. Kazuya gapes at him for a second and the man takes it as a sign to continue. He tells him that all members of the party were rank 2 as well, and they were among the best in the guild in terms of kills and money earned. He adds that they were even faster than Ota at dismantling too. Didn't know that that was also a competition. Weird flex, but alright then. Another member of the party says that what they were trying to say was that they were a much better team than Ota, who couldn't even fight. However, Ota, Janai, and Shimizu were able to hear their conversation clearly. While Ota doesn't turn back around, Shimizu doesn't take kindly to their words, angered at their disrespect for Ota. Janai calls out her name and with a curious look on his face, he tells her that it was Kazuya's decision to make. Still being crowded by the others looking for an opportunity to have him in their party, Kazuya is hit by an odd case of nostalgia. That sort of thing constantly happened during his time playing the game too. As his level increased, his relationship with other players got more complicated. He was approached by many annoying people, and he once spent a whole day just responding to all their messages. And now, it was all happening again. With a frown, he asks to borrow the man's dismantling knife. The man is confused, but he lends it to him anyway. The moment Kazuya sees the chipped and rusted blade, he immediately rips one of his sleeves off, much to the other adventurer's surprise. Without hesitating, Kazuya grits his teeth and uses the dull blade to slice at his arm. Don't do this at home, or anywhere at any time, kids. The adventurer watching yells in alarm. Frightened, he backs away and asks what Kazuya was doing, adding that he was freaking crazy. The adventurer continues to look completely terrified as Kazuya tells him not to look down on him. I didn't think that was possible when you already hacked away at 35 cockatrices. But I think this is a bit too much for just proving a point too, brother. Kazuya slices at his arm one more time, saying that the knife they had couldn't even cut an arm off, and yet they wanted him to believe that they could dismantle monsters with it. He lowers his bleeding arm and says that guys like them had no right to make fun of Ota. Get their asses, Kazuya. Finally, the adventuring party quickly turns to leave, saying that they shouldn't get close to Kazuya in fear of him. Kazuya lets out a quiet sigh of relief now that he knew they wouldn't be coming back. Suddenly, Ota appears with tears in her eyes. She grabs Kazuya's arm and screams at him, calling him an idiot and asking if he was trying to die. Completely valid reason to crash out, honestly. Ota looks back to Shimizu and yells for her to get some potions and bandages immediately since Kazuya was all out of mana. Shimizu comes back in a rush with a small basket of medical supplies. As Ota pulls at Kazuya's arm and starts performing first aid, Kazuya tries to ask her why she was crying, but she cuts him off. Heavily crying, she yells for him to shut up because she didn't know, so he should just shut it. She tells him that if he died, then that was the end for him, which didn't quite apply to him the first time, but she doesn't know that, so go off. Ota screams that he won't be able to get stronger. Oh, you know that that's going to bother him the most from what you've said, Lowell. She sobs as she says that he would never be able to see his loved ones ever again. After Ota calms down and finishes treating Kazuya, he looks at his bandaged wound and nervously apologizes. Internally, he wonders why he couldn't say anything back while he was being told off. Shimizu yells at a pleasantly smiling Janai to stop standing around and help heal Kazuya. Kazuya thanks them for their help before calling out to Ota. Leaning up at her, he asks if she would form a party with him. Ooh, that must have been a first for him ever to have a party member. Ota isn't quite sure she heard right. With a grin, Kazuya says that with her by his side, he feels like he can grow a lot stronger, bro. You're making it sound like you're proposing or something. Ota backs away, blushing furiously. Kazuya adds that he would of course be the leader, and Ota yells, asking why it would be him. Kazuya points out that she couldn't fight, and she tells him again to shut up. Meanwhile, Janai and Shimizu smile pleasantly between the two of them, saying that it felt like they got along quite well. Early in the morning at the Sato household, Kazuya trains again by swinging his bat. He counts up, trying to reach for 1,000. He stands up straight once he reaches 950, sweating profusely and breathing out a sigh. His mother watches quietly from the doorway for a moment, her expression suspicious. Suddenly she speaks up, asking if something good happened. Caught completely by surprise, Kazuya yells in alarm, telling her not to startle him like that. She calmly tells him that breakfast was ready. Over breakfast, his parents tell him not to push himself too hard. Kazuya says that they didn't need to worry because he was just following the training plan. Changing the subject, he excitedly brings out a card. Taking the card from him, his parents see that it was his adventurer certificate. Seeing as he had it already, it meant that he passed the exam. Kazuya proudly says he took down 35 cockatrices. His parents immediately look up at him, dumbfounded by his words, but Kazuya only says that he guessed he needed to work on his lack of mana next. A completely valid response from his parents and completely expected reaction from Kazuya. His parents look back at his adventurer certificate in disbelief. His father reads out loud that he was already in rank 2, amazed that he had already ranked higher than them. Suddenly, Kazuya plucks the certificate from his hands. He thanks them for the food and moves to the door, saying he would be back in time for dinner. His mother watches him go with a pleased smile, glad that he was able to make some friends over the break. Meanwhile, Kazuya's father was kneeling on the ground in dismay. He was feeling the weight of a father already surpassed by his son way too early, especially since he was only at rank 1. Kazuya's father quietly agrees with his wife, but she laughs and says that she didn't realize that the knowledge of how far Kazuya had gotten would hurt him so much. Crying out in sadness, Kazuya's father says that he just wanted to show off his cool dad side more. I mean this in the nicest way possible. But you deadass yelled at him for supposedly lying about taking down the slimes. That loses cool dad points in my book. Kazuya's mother says that he was acting like a disgrace and he should just be happy that his son was growing up. Meanwhile, Kazuya quickly runs over to a cafe. When he gets inside, he apologizes for being late. Waiting for him inside was Ota and Shimizu. Ota comments that he was super late and frowns at him, telling him not to make his higher-ups wait again. Shimizu happily greets him and asks him what he wanted from the menu. Kazuya seemingly starts to sob at the idea of going to a cafe during his break with two beauties, fully happy that he was reincarnated, still a true man at heart, I see. Ota asks Shimizu why Kazuya was crying, and Shimizu nervously answers that it was because Ota threatened him, which couldn't be farther from the truth. As their orders are settled, Shimizu thanks him for coming there and starts their meeting. First up, she excitedly opens a briefcase filled with cash and announces that it was what they owed him for the monsters he defeated. The money came to a total of 10 million yen. Bro is a kid and already a millionaire. Ota reprimands Shimizu, telling her that she was too loud. With a blank face, Kazuya thanks Shimizu for the money, and Ota reprimands him for not showing more of a reaction. Shimizu asks him if he's been back to the guild since, and Kazuya answers that he's been immersed in training the past week. However, he thinks he'll start going again next week. With a terrifying smile, Shimizu warns him never to dare pull the same stunt he did last time. The scene of a middle schooler slashing his own arm in front of terrified adventurers is an image still fresh in their minds. Kazuya nervously agrees with her. She suddenly changes the subject to their next discussion, catching Kazuya by surprise. Shimizu asks if he would form an official party with Ota, to which he immediately agrees. Ota exclaims at the speed of his answer, "Brother was locked in the moment he said it." Kazuya apologizes, realizing that his words sounded like something he just said on a whim. With a sincere expression, he asks Ota again if she would form a party with him. Ota hesitates for a moment before accepting his request. Kazuya excitedly thanks her. However, Ota suddenly cuts in, making one condition. She makes him promise that under all circumstances the both of them had to survive. Kazuya agrees. In that case, Shimizu gives him the item that increases the survival rate of adventurers. Kazuya leans forward as she presents something to him. In her hand was a return stone. An adventurer could return to the guild any time by wishing strongly for it. She says that she would leave that one to him. It was his final hope, so he should make sure to always have it on him. Kazuya holds it in his hands, amazed that it was the same teleport item he knew from the game. Kazuya immediately promises to, and Shimizu smiles at his answer. Setting the stone aside, Ota says that they should introduce themselves again. Kazuya and Ota introduce themselves once more, shaking hands, a much more proper introduction this time. Ota tells him that he can just call her by her first name too, so Kazuya hesitantly calls her Mao, which means we'll also be calling her Mao from here on too. Don't get confused now. Mao smiles to hear him say her name. Behind them, Shimizu smiles as she finds parties coming together is always a wonderful thing to witness. Mao asks Kazuya if he still had time because she wanted to take him somewhere nice. They head somewhere into town. Immediately upon arrival, Kazuya's face is full of excitement as Mao asks him if he likes the place. That is definitely the look of someone who likes something a lot. Mao smiles as she welcomes him into the topmost weapon and armor store in Shizuoka, making Kazuya exclaim in delight. She already knows how to get into his good graces. As they start to look around, Kazuya happily points to all the weapon types available. Daggers, rapiers, and morning stars among them, making Mao comment that he sure knew a lot. She remembers that Kazuya had broken his weapon, so she thought he might want a replacement. Kazuya comments that she was being really considerate. Suddenly, a hulking figure appears before them. The bearded man greets Mao, and she and Kazuya turn to him in surprise. Mao greets him as Sugiyama. Sugiyama turns to Kazuya and introduces himself, saying that Mao had told him all about Kazuya. Almost immediately, Kazuya exclaims that Sugiyama was so cool, which I have to agree with. Bro looks like he was built to be Hephaestus. Mao asks Sugiyama if he could find a good weapon for Kazuya. Sugiyama asks to see Kazuya's hand, and Kazuya opens his palm, his fingers full of blisters. At the sight of them, Sugiyama gets excited. He clamps Kazuya's hand in his, proud to find quite the warrior in him. Kazuya thanks him, overjoyed. Sugiyama immediately carries him towards the VIP section, saying that he would let him choose from one of his best works. Meanwhile, other shopgoers watch in disbelief that Sugiyama himself would show someone into the gallery and start asking who Kazuya was. Again, our brother is becoming famous wherever he goes. Mao and Kazuya start going through the gallery in awe at the displayed items. Meanwhile, Sugiyama searches through some of his other creations. He tells them that it was outrageous that more and more people have been using nothing but guns. However, it looked like Kazuya had been using plenty of clubs and swords, seeing the state of his hands. Sugiyama tells them that the weapons they saw at the front of the shop couldn't even compare to what he was showing them at the back. Finding what he was looking for, Sugiyama asks him what he thought of it as he hands the weapon to an awed Kazuya. Sugiyama tells him that it was a sword forged from high-quality dragon bone. It was an excellent weapon that excels at both defense and attack, and even had magic resistance. Holding it in his hands, Kazuya and Mao marvel at how light it was. Sugiyama answers that it was because he cared about the weight. Sugiyama tells him that he can buy it for just 2 million yen, and Mao exclaims that there was no mercy on the price. Sugiyama says that that was just how hard he worked to make it, but Mao wasn't having any of it. Meanwhile, however, while Kazuya continued to inspect the sword in his hand, he sensed a power coming from one of the barrels holding more weapons. Kazuya suddenly calls out to Sugiyama about the new weapon in his hands. Looking up, Sugiyama is surprised, not thinking that he would be interested in that specific weapon. Kazuya stares in awe at the weapon, and Sugiyama explains that it was a magical stick made of 100% pure mithril. It was named the Sugiyama Deluxe. Nice naming conventions you got there, sir. Mao exclaims in shock, hearing it was pure mithril. Sugiyama comments that although he knew he made it himself, it really was ridiculous. Sugiyama tells him that it was a magic staff, so it would surely take Kazuya quite a while to master it. But Kazuya wasn't listening and told them that he was picking it anyway, much to Mao's and Sugiyama's confusion. Sugiyama tries to reason with Kazuya, repeating that it was for magic users, but he's cut off when Kazuya suddenly uses the staff to make a series of swings. Finally, he slams the staff down with a powerful crash. Mithril was a material that raised magic efficiency. With that, Kazuya's buff and heal spells will also be more efficient. Best of all, if he raised his staff proficiency, he could even learn magic. Kazuya says that there was no way he couldn't choose such a rare and powerful weapon. He says that he'll take the Sugiyama Deluxe. The name sounds so fun, Lamau. With proud tears falling down his face, Sugiyama thanks him and admits that he actually considered it his best work in all his 40 years. But no matter how often he recommended it to magicians, nobody wanted it, and nowadays people didn't want anything other than guns. Brother has a vendetta against them, haha. Kazuya lights up as he holds the staff closer to himself, but Sugiyama stops him. He says that it didn't change the fact that it was his masterpiece, and so he would test him to see if he was worthy of the weapon. Kazuya asks what he meant by that, but Sugiyama raises a battle axe. Sugiyama orders Kazuya to ready his weapon and he would see what he was capable of. Mao calls out to Sugiyama, making sure he wasn't planning on going all out on a kid. However, Kazuya steps forward and tells her not to worry. With a determined expression, Kazuya says that he only needed to take a stance. Sugiyama praises him for his expression, looking exactly how an adventurer should. An adventurer leans over the counter, cornering the shopkeep. He demands to know how the hell does a weapon store not have any guns. The shopkeeper stays quiet as the adventurer continues to yell at him, "Bro, nothing good ever comes out of being a douche to customer service." However, as the adventurer accuses the shopkeeper of looking down on adventurers like him, he fails to notice the angered presence behind him. The shopkeeper flinches. In the next second, the adventurer crashes out a wall. That's the meaning of screwing around and finding out. Sugiyama had punched the adventurer. With his fist still outstretched, he says that worthless people like him shouldn't pretend to be adventurers. He says that the adventurer's reliance on guns has made him undisciplined and a coward. With a very bruised cheek, the adventurer stumbles away, threatening Sugiyama on his way out. The style of fighting had changed a lot over the past few decades. More and more adventurers had stopped using melee weapons and chose to use guns instead. They wanted to take down their enemies safely from long distances. It was a logical way to fight, but it was also the reason adventurers had started slacking in their training. They were beginning to stop wanting to grow stronger. As Sugiyama finished his creation of the Sugiyama Deluxe, he thought he couldn't allow that. But as time went on, adventurers continued to choose guns, the Sugiyama Deluxe eventually ending up from being displayed at the front of the shop to stored away at a barrel in the gallery, and Sugiyama had no choice if he wanted to keep food on the table. He watched as adventurers came and went with their new advanced weaponry. He made excuses, telling himself that times had changed, and yet as he looked at Kazuya's pure joy in holding the Sugiyama Deluxe, he was amazed to see a boy like him still around. Despite his old age, he found himself hoping again. Calling for Kazuya's attention, he asks if he knew the true nature of the grueling path he's chosen. Kazuya is confused, faltering for a second. Sugiyama tells him that with guns he'd be able to grow stronger much more easily, but Kazuya holds on to the mithril staff harder and turns his idea down. Determined, he says that that wasn't the kind of strong that he wanted to become. Interested with his answer, Sugiyama laughs and tells Kazuya to show him the path he's chosen. Kazuya frowns. He didn't really get what was going on, but he lowered the Sugiyama Deluxe and decided that he couldn't use it there. There was only one thing he wanted to be. He flexes his fingers and pulls back his arm. Sugiyama questions why Kazuya put his weapon down. There's a stand still between the two of them, but when Kazuya looks back at him, Sugiyama flinches first. Kazuya's eyes were so full of bloodlust that Sugiyama faltered. Watching him prepare to throw a punch, Sugiyama wonders if he really was just a middle schooler. He still is, of course, it's just that he's got a lot of determination and is a hardcore gamer. Sugiyama laughs to himself. Finally, he lowers his battle axe and apologizes for wanting to test Kazuya. Holding out the mithril staff to him, Sugiyama finally agreed to sell it to him. I didn't realize the damn staff was that big, OMG? Kazuya asks him if he was sure, but Sugiyama just tells him that, in exchange, he wanted him to bring it back to the shop for maintenance on the regular. Kazuya agrees. Holding the staff securely in his hands, he determinedly promises Sugiyama that he would become stronger. Sugiyama marvels that Kazuya had both willpower and tenacity. Mao suddenly comes up to Sugiyama, bumping a fist at his chest, asking him what the hell he was doing with the kid. However, Sugiyama tells her that Kazuya gave him a look that made him feel like Kazuya was truly about to kill him. He tells her that Kazuya wasn't normal. Looking at his slightly shaking hands, he says that the only ones who would challenge him were the stupid, reckless, or maybe those who are ready to risk their lives. He asks her if she would be able to keep up with him. I can't explain it enough, but somehow she sounds like she can fit in all three if she agreed to partner with him even after seeing him slice at his own arm. However, Mao just points to a childishly excited Kazuya and raises an eyebrow, saying that he was just a normal brat. What part of stabbing yourself and killing 35 monster birds is normal? Sugiyama is confused, but Mao agrees that he did scare her a bit at first. Sugiyama tries to reason with her, asking if she understood how amazing Kazuya was, but Mao only says that he was exaggerating. She leaves his side and punches Kazuya over the head, saying that he was being way too selfish. As Sugiyama watches Mao and Kazuya banter and argue, he slowly understands that they might make a good team after all. Oh, they're definitely going to be a riot. Later in the day, Mao and Kazuya walk down the city. Kazuya says that Sugiyama was really surprised when he paid in cash. Kazuya, you're gonna give the old man a heart attack. First you looked like you could kill him, and now you just paid 10 million up front. The Sugiyama Deluxe ended up costing him his full payment. But thanks to that, he now had an incredible weapon. Mao smiles, glad for him, but Kazuya suddenly rustles through his coat. He takes out a weapon and offers it to Mao. She exclaims to realize it was a mithril carving knife. Aw, now y'all come as a pair of mithril-wearing weirdos. Kazuya tells her that Sugiyama had given it to him as an extra. He adds that it was also thanks for forming a party with him. Mao is at a loss, realizing that the blade was worth 2 million yen. Mao then says that she wasn't doing it for his sake or anything, and she was just in it for the money. You deserve the blade more now for the honesty, Mao. Kazuya adds that it was also thanks for keeping the other adventurers away from him. Mao goes silent for a moment. With a blush on her cheeks, she softly thanks him for the blade. Kazuya is struck silent for a moment, seeing her expression before he says that he should be the one thanking her. Changing the subject, Mao asks him if they were going hunting tomorrow. But Kazuya apologizes and says that he already had plans. Mao frowns at the idea, especially how they had just formed a party together. However, Kazuya says that he just thinks that he should show up at school. He takes out his phone and holds it up to a confused Mao. On the screen was a poster for Shizuoka Prefecture's middle school swordsman tournament. Mao says that it was the newcomer event for middle schoolers and she was familiar with its fame. Kazuya says that he wanted to give it a try. Mao says that if the delinquent wanted to go to school, then she wasn't going to stop him. Mao wishes him good luck, but as she says that she was sure he'd win, she suddenly stops short. Reading more about the event, she informs him that today was the last day to register. Kazuya freezes. He takes back his phone and screams as he checks it for himself. Internally, Mao just thinks of how he really was just a brat. In Shizuoka's first swordsman middle school, a teacher in front of a class says that as all of the students knew, next week would serve as both a mixer and welcome for the main school. The event was the tournament. The class explodes into excited chatter as their teacher says that the contents of the fights have been kept secret thus far. However, should they perform well, they would be recommended for the prefecture tournament. Suddenly, someone at the back of the class shouts in delight. A student wearing a bandana exclaims that it was a huge chance in just the second week of school. He declared that he was going to win for sure. Another student wearing a face mask tells Naruko, the student in a bandana, to cut it out because he was acting like a kid. Naruko shouts at the boy wearing a mask, Shigure, to shut up as well. A student named Nanas says she was definitely going to make it far, and a girl behind her cheers her on. The teacher up front says that it was all good they were fired up, but he tells them not to forget about one more thing. Students from higher grades may also participate, so the first years should just focus on not getting seriously hurt. Every year, a lot of first-year students get sent to the hospital. Nanas and the other girl suddenly don't look too excited. However, he also reminds them that it was still possible to beat their upperclassmen. A person walks into the room. Karen stands before the class. The teacher tells the students that Karen was able to do so the year before, and she was there that day to give them some encouraging words. Karen greets them and introduces herself once more as the student council president. Naruko excitedly raises a hand and yells, asking how she was able to do it, and Shigure tells him to shut up again. Karen says that the year before, they competed with monster subjugation, and she was able to defeat a cockatrice in 2 hours. She's gonna lose her head when she finds out Kazuya took down 35 in a single run. OMG. Completely immersed in the story, Naruko leans over his seat and says that cockatrice were E-rank monsters, but Shigure reminds him that depending on the specimen, some were D-rank. Although a few of his classmates murmured in amazement around him, another student with dark-colored bangs had his head buried in his arms, looking bored. Karen says that they still didn't know what the subject of that year's tournament might be, but she would still do her best to win. The students watch attentively as she says that she hopes they could all try their best and inspire each other to grow stronger together. The teacher beside her tries to remind Karen not to provoke them, but one of the students raises their hand, calling for Karen's attention. It was the student with dark bangs. Rather sarcastically, he reminds her that they had the super powerful school-skipping cheater that year, and he asks what they should do if he shows up. "Sir, you dropped your jealousy, it's showing." The teacher tries to reprimand the student, who was named Kageyama, but Karen holds out a hand and stops him. Karen agrees that Kazuya was powerful. However, she adds that Kageyama had no idea how hard Kazuya had worked, so treating him like a cheater was quite rude. Unbothered, Kageyama laughs and says that Kazuya had skills before he even entered school. He even heard that Kazuya had taken down a grizzly. Leaning back on his arms, Kageyama asks her how in the world they were going to be excited knowing that. He also points out that she was nothing next to him either. Hearing the school bell, he packs up his bag and says that he was going to go ahead and sign up already. The teacher calls out to him. Naruko asks who that was, and Shigure says that it was one of their classmates. Somewhere in the school, Karen walks the halls. Thinking to herself, she knew what Kageyama was saying if she was in his shoes. After all, Kazuya was so strong she couldn't even tell how strong he was. Not to mention he also has his tenacity bordering on insanity. Suddenly, Karen was knocked out of her thoughts when she heard someone call out to her. A younger student stood stiffly before her. Nervously, he thanks her for her encouraging words. He introduces himself as Mano Tsuyoshi, a first-year student. Tsuyoshi suddenly panics and starts going on a tangent about how he enrolled in that school because he really looked up to her. But when he starts getting too excited, Karen tells him to calm down. Time passes and they're sitting down on one of the benches. Tsuyoshi apologizes for being too nervous. Karen asks him what he wanted to talk about. He starts off by saying that during the entrance ceremony, the principal was about to force him to step up for the appraisal skill, but the one who saved him was Kazuya. I thought that the principal really was calling on Kazuya. No wonder this guy was panicking. Tsuyoshi says that he hasn't been to school since then, so he wondered if he was doing all right. Confused, Karen awkwardly asks why he was asking her, but Tsuyoshi is just as confused as she was. Tsuyoshi asks if Karen and Kazuya weren't dating because he thought they were. I love that she defended Kazuya so much that people believe they're going out Olmao. Blushing furiously, Karen grabs onto Tsuyoshi's shoulders and says that they weren't dating and she didn't even have his phone number. Tsuyoshi is surprised at her sudden reaction, but Karen shakes him silly, saying that Kazuya was only a friend. Their banter is cut short when someone appears and calls out to Karen. A man claims that he knew all about what they were talking about. He heard that she was dating a first year when she was supposed to be his girlfriend. Supposed to be, huh? Crazy way of putting things. Karen doesn't look impressed at all, having something happen one after another that day. Tsuyoshi asks who the man was, and Karen says that his name was Sasahara. She rescued him once while he was hurt, and then he started getting weird ideas in his head. Suddenly, Sasahara exclaims at the sight of Tsuyoshi. He assumes that he was Kazuya, and Tsuyoshi starts to panic. Sasahara grits his teeth, saying that it was unforgivable. Charging in with his training sword in hand, Sasahara yells that he would never forgive him. Brother just went all in for his not even girlfriend. Tsuyoshi yells in fear, closing his eyes. A loud sound echoes as Sasahara's training sword comes into contact with Karen's. She had caught Sasahara's attack, protecting Tsuyoshi. Sasahara is caught off guard at Karen's sudden appearance. With a terrifying glare, Karen apologizes, but she says that she was in a really bad mood. With a powerful swing upwards, she disarms Sasahara of his weapon. She brings her sword back and, preparing to swing again, warns him that she won't be able to hold back that day. Is that implying that she's had to kick his ass numerous times already? With no way to defend himself, Sasahara takes the full damage of her slash. He cries out in pain. As he goes down to the ground, Karen reminds him not to call her name without using honorifics. Sasahara mumbles out Karen's name one final time, using proper honorifics before he completely passes out. Suddenly, Tsuyoshi exclaims in delight, amazed at Karen. Karen squeals in surprise, forgetting she was with him. Tsuyoshi continues to praise her, and Karen blushes in embarrassment, admitting that it wasn't on purpose. Just then, she hears rumbling. Before them, a motorcycle stops, two people in helmets riding the bike. Mao, the one steering the bike, turns back to Kazuya and reprimands him again to at least check the schedule. Kazuya retorts that he's already apologized for that over and over. Mao takes off her helmet and orders Kazuya to go check in immediately while he still had 5 minutes left. As Kazuya gets off the bike, he notices Karen watching him. Karen stares in shock, asking Kazuya if he was together with Mao. Finally noticing her as well, Mao greets Karen, much to Kazuya's confusion. Chapter 12. Standing in front of the registration office, the man managing the counter officially confirms that Kazuya was now registered to participate in the competition. Afterwards, Kazuya and Karen walk down the school halls. Karen is glad they made it in time, and Kazuya thanks her. He asks her if her friend Sasahara was okay, and Karen hesitantly answers that he probably was. Tsuyoshi had gladly told them to leave Sasahara to him. Changing the subject, she says that she didn't think he'd compete. Kazuya is confused. Karen says that she was sure that he didn't care about school at all. Laughing softly, Kazuya tells her that that wasn't true. He admits that he's been feeling like he was getting close to the limit of how far he could make it by training on his own. He clenches a blistered hand into a fist. Determinedly, he says that if he participated in the tournament, he thinks it may make him stronger. Karen smiles at his words. Kazuya adds that he would also like to know just how strong people the same age as him were. Karen changes the subject again. Leaning impossibly closer to him, Karen asks in a frenzy how he and Mao knew each other. Kazuya leans back because of her sudden proximity, coming up on a blank. Time passes and they find themselves sitting outside the school again. Kazuya had told her that he and Mao had formed a party together. Seeing the expression on her face, Kazuya nervously asks if she was angry, but Karen denies it in a deadpan voice. She comments that it was an incredible coincidence. Kazuya is amazed to hear that Karen's older sister used to be in a party with Mao. Wait, is it the one she cried about OMG? Karen explains that before her sister left the prefecture to study at university, their party was pretty famous. Kazuya is surprised to hear that her sister had left. Karen says that she's been exploring all over the country to study and fight monsters. But since there's been more monsters recently, Karen thinks that her sister's risking her life doing it. With a sad smile on her face, she says that Mao just couldn't leave people like Kazuya alone. Karen says that it was because Kazuya was so reckless. She thinks back on Mao taking the Sugiyama Deluxe from him before she left, saying that since he hadn't registered it at school yet, he should leave it with her, despite Kazuya's reluctance. Kazuya is surprised to hear that he was reckless, and Karen retorts that he didn't even realize it. She tells him that she won't forgive him if he ends up making Mao cry. Oh sis, he already did. Sobbed even. She smiles brightly at him, waiting for his response, and Kazuya nervously promises not to, saying that he wasn't planning on it. Finally, Karen gets up and stretches. She says that she would show him around school. Kazuya tries to say that he was planning on training after visiting the school, but she cuts him off, telling him not to be shy. As they continue to talk, they're unaware of two students listening to them from around the corner. Later on, up at the school rooftop, someone asks the two students tailing Kazuya earlier if they were sure. From the two, the student wearing a beanie says that he was sure and that there was no doubt it was him. Kajiyama sat quietly at the school rooftop playing a video game. He's quiet for a second before the student in the beanie says that they saw Kazuya sign up for the competition too. The student asks him what they were going to do. As he says that winning wasn't even a possibility since Kazuya might just send them to the hospital, Kageyama puts down his gaming console and slams his foot on the wall next to the student's head. The student is struck silent as Kageyama stares him down. Bro, what in the world is that position? Your flexibility and leg strength is crazy. With a deadly look in his eyes, he asks the student what he thought was the most important thing when facing a boss. As Kageyama removes his foot from the wall, the student nervously says that it was teammates. Kageyama says that he was talking about something even more basic. With a crazed look in his eyes, he says that it was information. He wanted to know what Kazuya was capable of and what he couldn't do. Kageyama tells them not to worry about losing. First, they needed to investigate everything about Kazuya. Meanwhile, Karen takes Kazuya to the school gym. Kazuya marvels at the gym's size as Karen informs him that it would be the venue for the competition. It was kept unlocked after school so students could use it as they pleased. Kazuya says that he was sure that everyone was nervous since the tournament starts tomorrow. Looking around at the scattered students, Karen agrees. Kazuya looks around as well and thinks that almost nobody could concentrate from the looks of it. But what was worse, it didn't look like they were having fun. Suddenly he hears a commotion from the side. It was Naruko, holding a basketball in his hands. Saying that there were still another 100 balls, he takes a ready stance. However, Shigure rolls back his shoulders saying that he wasn't going to help him anymore because he was tired. Naruko sulks for only a moment before he throws back his arm and throws the ball with all his strength at Shigure. Naruko pouts that he caught it. However, Shigure says that for the latter half of their training he was going to try and kill him. Completely normal middle school behavior, carry on. He asks Naruko if that was okay, and excitedly Naruko says that he wouldn't have it any other way. Karen lightly calls out to Kazuya as he watches intently. He says that it looked like some nice training. Suddenly, a figure sneaks up behind them. 2 armored students rush in at them, training swords ready. Karen turns around, but it was too late. One of the armored students, the boy in a beanie from earlier, leaps into the air, sword ready to swing. Kazuya's sight focuses as he quickly turns around. From up the bleachers, Kageyama watches intently at Kazuya and the other students fight. He observes that attacking Kazuya from his blind spot wouldn't work. Back at the gym grounds, Kazuya had caught the student by the arm. With a terrifying look on his eyes, he asks the student who he was. The student's face completely drops at Kazuya's expression. Behind Kazuya's back, the other student rushes in with his own sword. Kazuya turns around just as he swings it and he ducks in time, the sword easily missing him. Kageyama mutters to himself that it looked like fighting 2 at once was also easy on him. Brother is watching him like he's getting ready for a volleyball match against a powerhouse team. Kageyama comments that he had expected this much, but he looked like he'll do fine fighting people too. Back in the grounds, Karen calls out to the attacking students asking what in the world they were doing, but Kazuya holds out an arm to stop her. Karen questions what he was doing. Kazuya smiles in excitement. Kageyama leans back on his arms again, intent on finding out how to win over a cheating bastard like him. His words, not mine. Watching the fight about to start, Karen tells them to stop. She reminds them that students weren't allowed to have duels without school permission. But she's cut off by Kazuya. He takes on a fighting stance, saying that he would be fine. Readying his fists, he smiles and says he doesn't mind as long as he gets to fight. The 2 students flinch before rushing at him again, telling him not to look down on them. As the student swings, Kazuya quickly slides up to his side. With his bare hands, he punches the student's torso and the first one goes down. Kazuya grins maniacally as he turns to the other student, making him flinch in fear. Fists were the weapon of a high-ranking job, so Kazuya knew he wouldn't be able to use them right away. His fists were very versatile, so he wanted to use them first. But no matter how many skill proficiencies he maxed, fist proficiency never appeared on the skill sheet. There was only one reason he could think of, that his level wasn't high enough. He hadn't leveled up by fighting monsters, so he'll try to level up by fighting against people. Bro is going to speedrun beating the hell out of people until he becomes the Fist King, apparently. That was why he decided to enter the school tournament. Kazuya rushes up to his last opponent. He delivers a swift punch at his enemy, right at his armor, taunting him and saying he was running away. The student freezes, questioning how Kazuya's bare fist had so much power enough to bend his armor. Kazuya throws punch after punch at him. Internally, Kazuya tells himself that if he keeps calm and observes his opponent, he can see every sword swing. Just as he thinks so, the student makes a wild swing and Kazuya dodges it easily. Against monsters and humans alike, Kazuya knew that observing them remained important. Kageyama continues to watch thoughtfully up at the bleachers, noticing that Kazuya wasn't afraid of getting hurt. Kazuya grins, yeah, that's not the look of someone who feared pain. Flexing his broken fingers, Kazuya tells his opponent that he punched his armor so much it broke the bones in his hands. It seemed like his fists weren't weapons yet. He quickly heals them and gets ready once more. Kazuya taunts the students again, saying that since he came there to make weapons out of his fists, He'll have him accompany him a while longer. The student frowns at his words, clutching his broken armor. Kageyama's fingers quickly type across his laptop's keyboard. Speed, power, technique. All of Kazuya's stats were way past the level of a middle schooler. Kageyama laughs in happiness, thinking how Kazuya was certainly a worthy target to win over. From the sidelines, Shigure watches in amazement, but he turns to the side at an odd sound. He's quiet for a moment before he lets out a long sigh. He tells a sobbing Naruko not to cry. Shigure reassures him that it will be alright and he'll become strong someday too. Now that's a real homebro. Naruko softly agrees. Meanwhile, the fight carries on, and as he receives another punch, the student wonders what was wrong with Kazuya. I think the better question would be if there was anything about him that made sense. The student struggles to block another punch using his training sword. For him, Kazuya's attacks were too fast and too strong. He couldn't understand how he was able to pull it off barehanded. He's knocked out of his thoughts when Kazuya asks him why he wasn't attacking. Motioning for him to make the first move, Kazuya tells him that he was getting bored of chasing him around. The student curses at him. Making a swift jab at Kazuya, he tells him to shut up. His actions only make Kazuya more fired up. The student pivots and swings his sword at Kazuya, but that only reassures Kazuya that when fighting people, verbal attacks were pretty effective. He suddenly places a hand on the guy's shoulder to keep him in place and tells him that he noticed that he kept looking to the side. Kazuya smirks, asking if it was the guy up at the bleachers. Fully turning to look at Kageyama, Kazuya asks the student if it was Kageyama who sent the student after him. The student is unable to control his expression, his eyes completely furious, and Kazuya knew that he was right. Annoyed, the student takes another swing at him and Kazuya dodges again. Turning to look at Kageyama once more, Kazuya realizes that he was his real opponent. He makes up his mind. Kageyama notices that Kazuya was looking at him and he frowns. Keeping his eyes locked on Kageyama, Kazuya makes a fist and tells him to watch. Using his full power, he delivers a punch right at his current enemy's torso. It sends the student flying. The boy crashes into the wall right below where Kageyama was sitting. Looking down at him, Kageyama laughs and calls Kazuya pretty awesome and a cheater at the same time. With a maniacal laugh, he declares that tomorrow he would tear the sheep's clothing right off of Kazuya, so he should look forward to it. Karen kneels by the student that Kazuya threw into a wall, asking if he was okay. The student grunts in pain. Looking at the damage, Karen is in disbelief that his armor had basically caved in. She questions herself if she had any chance at all against Kazuya. As she looks up to Kazuya, who was calmly healing his wounded hands, she makes up her mind that she couldn't lose there. She had to win because she needed to catch up with her older sister. Why do I get the feeling the story with the sister isn't as clean-cut as they're making it out to be? The day of the grand competition arrives and speakers all over the school blare out announcements to the civilians walking amongst the stalls surrounding the arena. Crowds begin to gather at the stadium as the speakers notify them that the fierce battles between the competing students would be starting that day. The announcer, wearing goggles and a suit, calls out for cheers from the spectators already in the arena for the beginning of the Shizuoka Prefecture Middle School Swordsman Grand Competition. The arena erupts into a burst of applause. As the announcer carries on with hosting the competition, Kazuya and some of the other contestants linger below the elevated stage and around the battlefield. Suddenly, someone comes up to Kazuya. It was Tsuyoshi. He asks Kazuya if there was something wrong. Kazuya hesitantly admits that he simply wasn't good with that kind of atmosphere. Tsuyoshi asks if he was nervous, and Kazuya admits that he was feeling something similar. After all, the welcoming tournament was part of the day's event too. For all the contestants gathered there, whether they would get good results or not, it would still have a huge impact on the rest of their school life. Kazuya noticed that there were a lot of people wearing full body armor. Tsuyoshi agrees, saying that everyone was wearing amazing equipment. However, he noticed Kazuya's casual clothing, and worriedly asked if all he really had was just the item on his back. Kazuya is concerned by his reaction, but admits that that was all he had. Tsuyoshi asks if he was going to be alright, but Kazuya never gets to answer. At that moment, a familiar presence takes the stage. It was Karen. With microphone in hand, she greets the crowd and introduces herself as the student council president. She thanks them for attending the school's spring tournament. Watching her speak, Kazuya realizes that he had never seen Karen in armor before. Karen continues, promising something as the winner of last year's tournament. With a serious expression, she says that she would win that year's competition too, no matter what. Not expecting her words, her fellow council members look at her worriedly. The announcer from before approaches her hesitantly, reminding her that they were also holding the school's welcome event, but she quickly excuses herself. Whispering erupts from amongst the crowd of contestants on the event grounds. They couldn't help but think that Karen was rather scary during her speech, adding that she felt completely different that day. However, they also all knew she would act differently. After all, that year they had a certain first year among their ranks. They were all unanimously pissed off. turning to Kazuya with barely hidden annoyance. However, Kazuya remained mostly unaware of their anger, only noticing the tense atmosphere around him. The announcer quickly tries to take control of the situation again, and something is rolled up into the stage. He announces the rules for that year's competition. They were going to have a tournament-style battle. The participants would be split into 2 blocks and duel each other, with the winner proceeding further into the tournament. The winner of each block would face each other in the finals. It was mostly a straightforward way of doing things. All weapons with the exception of firearms were permitted. The contestants would win by knocking their opponent out of having them surrender. Among the contestants, a girl points out to Nanas that they were placed in the same block. Looking at their own copy of the tournament tree, Nanase groans as she realizes that she would have to face Karen soon. Behind her sat Shigure and Naruko. Naruko notices that Shigure was also in Block B. Shigure agrees, saying that the tournament tree was mostly as they had predicted. However, Kazuya was noticeably in Block A. It was the block where all the others were in their 3rd year. Kazuya remained oblivious to the 3rd years around him, looking down at him with cocky smirks. From up on the stands, Nanas and the others are concerned, pointing out to their teacher that they were going too far. However, their teacher said that they saw him with the other 1st years the day before. From the observation deck, a woman compliments Todoroki for his wonderful work in putting Kazuya in Block A. Todoroki says it was no problem, especially since it was a request from the PTA. Now everything was set up for their kid to win. Back on the event grounds, Kazuya turns as someone calls out to him. It was Sasahara. With a smug grin, he says that everyone in Block A were fierce fighters with impressive results in the previous years. He proudly says that Kazuya was going to get run over and he should say goodbye to Karen. Not only that, today also marked the last day anyone would pay him any special attention. Hearing their conversation, Karen is enraged, a blush on her cheeks. But Kazuya merely looked unimpressed, wondering what Sasahara was even going on about. But he keeps going, saying that it was only a matter of time before he regretted everything. Eyes sharpening, Kazuya thought he preferred if the tournament didn't take too much time. With that in mind, he leaps up onto the stage and borrows the microphone from the announcer, who was too shocked to disagree. Tsuyoshi calls out to him from below the stage, wondering what he was up to. However, Kazuya smiles and speaks into the mic, offering a special rule. Turning to the contestants of Block A, Kazuya offers for him to go against everyone there, all of them at the same time. Karen's expression darkens as she listens. Turning up to the observation deck, Kazuya asks for the principal's thoughts. The entire Block A group goes quiet at his words, but Sasahara is immediately pissed. From the observation deck, the principal is completely stunned and shocked. From up the bleachers, Shigure turns silently and comments that Naruko was crying again, hugging a concrete column. Naruko says that he wasn't crying. Nanase mutters under her breath that Kazuya was completely crazy. From the crowd, Tsuyoshi stares in shock at Kazuya's serious expression. Kazuya continues and says that he heard everyone wanted to learn skills. His words make everyone go quiet once more. Kazuya declares that he would teach whoever is able to beat him how to obtain a skill. However, he says that if they didn't want skills, then they could just ignore his offer. Everyone looks at him with varying looks of anger and disbelief. Sasahara smiles and laughs, saying that Kazuya was making fun of them. Unsheathing his swords, Sasahara says that he would personally teach him just how strict the school could be. He tells Kazuya, nicknamed Mr. Exceptional, to prepare himself. With a pleased smile, Kazuya pulls out his weapon from its bag. The arena erupts into excited screaming, the energy soaring. It was finalized that a special match against the promising first-year student would be happening. On one side, they had the team consisting mostly of volunteering 3rd years led by a student with great grades, Sasahara. The announcer ups the excitement by asking the crowd if they thought Kazuya would be able to make it out of the battle in one piece. From up the bleachers, Mao and Shimizu sit together. Mao calls Kazuya an idiot for standing out too much. Shimizu thinks it was a silver lining that not everyone joined against him. However, it still looked like more than half took him up on his challenge. There looked to be about 50 of them on Sasahara's side. Mao wonders how in the world Kazuya was raised to end up being such a battle-crazed maniac. She wanted to see who his parents were. She's unaware that sitting slightly above them was Kazuya's parents, whose heads were lowered in embarrassment. Shimizu tries to reassure Mao that Kazuya would be fine, but Mao says that she was mistaken. Mao was worried for his opponents, not Kazuya himself. She frowns, hoping that Kazuya would hold back even a little bit. Kazuya raises his weapon, expression completely calm. From across him, Sasahara asks if Kazuya was scared to have to face so many people. But Kazuya disagrees. He says that he was actually disappointed to see how only a few came. Not even Karen joined the fight. One of the student council members beside Karen couldn't believe that they were letting Kazuya fight against a whole crowd, calling the rules absurd. Karen simply says that although the tournament was held every year to welcome the first-year students, in reality it was more like a hazing ritual for them. Even they suffered a lot back when they were first years. Karen believes that the school wanted to use the tournament as an excuse to purge every troublemaker they could. From up the observation deck, Principal Todoroki takes a step back as the woman with him earlier takes to the microphone. She clears her throat. The woman greets all the competitors and introduces herself as the president of the PTA and host of the tournament, Sasahara. From down the battlefield, the contestants are shocked to hear the woman's name. Sasahara, the third-year student, turns to the observation deck and waves to his mother, complimenting her for looking great. President Sasahara says into the mic that their goal with the tournament that year had been to create as safe and peaceful an environment as they could, where the contestants could show off as much as they wanted. As such, they decided to go with a one-on-one tournament unlike the year before. However, among the people who participated in the tournament every year, they always found people engaging in dishonest conduct. Just as she says that, a cameraman focuses the live video footage on Karen. The council member beside her is immediately pissed, saying that he couldn't film her without permission. President Sasahara continues, saying that there were also those who had no respect for their school. Her attention focused on Kazuya. She says that the school raised its students to value tradition and order, and the people who ignored those rules would be punished to guide them in the right path. As she finishes her words, someone hits the bell with a hammer, signaling the start of the fight. Kazuya couldn't help but find President Sasahara's speech rather nasty. However, he had no time to think more about it. The crowd of contestants immediately rush towards him, but Kazuya tightly holds onto his weapon. This world was the same as the game, so he knew its essence must also be the same. Getting into his battle position, he tells himself that he had to risk his life to grow stronger. The first of his enemies finally reach him, weapons drawn, but with a single swing of his bat, the other contestants are sent flying. Kazuya pulls his arm back, prepared for the next wave. However, his eyes widen as he senses something coming closer. He dodges in time as another contestant swings his sword down at him. With the contestant's sword lowered, Kazuya steps on the blade to keep it in place. The contestant is unable to use his weapon as Kazuya locks it in place with a single foot. The man looks up in time to see Kazuya raise his weapon and slam it heavily over his head. With another one down, Kazuya rushes into the fray, dealing damage after damage in a frenzy. When he stops moving, his path is littered with fallen enemies. In an instant, 10 contestants were already down. He only had 40 more to go through. He glances behind him with a glare. Sasahara, the student, couldn't believe his eyes. One of the other contestants approaches Sasahara, saying that things weren't turning out like he had said. Sasahara had told them that Kazuya simply got into the school using connections, and that he wouldn't be strong at all. Sasahara flinches as Kazuya speaks up, commenting that Sasahara wasn't attacking him. If he was going to keep things up like that, then Kazuya himself would come at him. He rushes in, bat raised. When Kazuya was within striking distance, Sasahara snapped out of it and called for a shield. In the nick of time, a contestant specializing as a tank comes in between Sasahara and Kazuya, but Kazuya's hit is so strong that the tank is sent back, bumping roughly into Sasahara. Kazuya tells the tank that he wouldn't be able to take his attacks with the way he was doing things. Kazuya puts more pressure into his attack. It sends Sasahara and the tank tumbling back to the ground. Squatting before them calmly, Kazuya says that they wouldn't be able to endure more than a single strike from the look of things. Sasahara grits his teeth in anger, cursing at Kazuya. However, from behind him, someone drops their weapon. The remaining contestants tell Sasahara that they were retreating, unable to take the fight. They say that they had high school exams coming up and couldn't afford to get injured there. They all step down the battlefield. Sasahara desperately calls out to them. Finally, it was only him and Kazuya on the field. Sasahara couldn't believe that he was completely left behind by the others. Kazuya gets up from the ground and says that since it was only Sasahara left, then it looked like they were having a duel. Sasahara stares at Kazuya nervously, but Kazuya just says that he looked forward to learning from him. Kazuya asks again whether he was going to attack or not, but Sasahara shrieks and chooses instead to throw his arms up over him in a weak shield. He braces for impact, eyes shut tight. Kazuya couldn't believe that Sasahara had even let go of his sword. Raising his weapon high up in the air to deal the final blow, Kazuya couldn't help but think that it looked like there really was absolutely no reason for him to attend the school. Just then, someone screams, giving a signal to someone. Kazuya's eyes widen as he's barely able to parry someone's incoming attack with his bat. Sasahara's eyes are wide open, not expecting the attack as well, but Kazuya's frown deepens. Someone's foot pressing down hard on his bat. The person quickly leaps away from him in a series of flips. Kazuya raises his bat again, asking who that was. Across from him, a man with familiar glasses remembers that he hadn't introduced himself yet to Kazuya. He introduces himself as Kageyama Naozumi, saying that it was the name of the one who was going to defeat him. Behind Kageyama was a whole party of contestants. Kageyama tells Kazuya to remember his name, adding that Kazuya was nothing but a cheating bastard. Chapter 16. Kazuya asks again who Kageyama was, but Kageyama already knew that Kazuya would be oblivious. After all, he had been favored enough not to come to school. Kageyama explains that they were first years like him, however, every single one of them hated Kazuya. From those behind Kageyama, Naruko says that he didn't really hate Kazuya. Shigure reminds him about their briefing. Naruko knew that they would never be able to win unless they defeated Kazuya, so taking him down was their top priority. Kageyama approaches Sasahara and says that he was grateful to him and the rest of the third years. After all, they gave them such a golden opportunity. However, Kageyama couldn't believe that they had attacked Kazuya without any kind of plan whatsoever. It was a completely dumb move on their part. Sasahara exclaims, offended by his words. Kageyama says that he could leave the rest of it to them. Kageyama turns back to Kazuya, saying that they, the First Alliance, would defeat him. Looking down at his bat, Kazuya couldn't help but think about the first attack he received from the Alliance. The kick did take him by surprise, but even so, he still thought it was powerful. Looking at Naruko, he thinks that the fight might actually be fun after all. Raising his bat again, he says that he was relieved. He hadn't had nearly enough of a fight. He grins at the First Year Alliance, asking them to hold out longer than the third years did. Kageyama says that Kazuya's overconfidence was his biggest weak point. With a raise of his sword, he gives a signal to the others to begin their plan. Immediately, 5 fighters are on him, coming from multiple angles to spring a synchronized attack. Kazuya realizes it was a highly agile squad and understands how that could prove to be troublesome. However, as one of the attackers swung his sword at Kazuya, all he could think was how they still weren't on the same level as the third years. Kazuya swings his bat as well, hoping to parry the attack. But just as he does so, a shielder comes in between them, tanking the damage. He was surprised to see that they even had heavily armored reinforcements. The shielder's grunts from the pressure of Kazuya's attack. Kazuya steps back, rather surprised to see that they had already pushed him into a corner. But in the next instance, he disappears from where he just stood. He immediately reappears in front of the shielders from before. His swing is a whole lot stronger as he completely destroys the contestant's shield, sending them to the ground. Kazuya looks up and tells Kageyama that such meager defenses wouldn't last against him. However, Kageyama smiles and calls him an idiot. Kazuya's eyes widen as he feels the shielder's hand wrap around his ankle. With the shielder throwing up the remains of their shield up over themselves, Kageyama tells Kazuya has just stepped into the Hell Zone. Kazuya freezes as he's vaguely aware of the rain of weapons quickly descending towards him. He looks up, watching the incoming attack with focus. With a single swing of his bat, he deflects the incoming weapons. Most of them end up falling on the shielder. Kazuya stood over the remains of the rain of weapons completely unharmed, making Kageyama click his tongue angrily. He couldn't believe that Kazuya was able to block all of them, adding that he really was a monster. Suddenly, Naruko appears beside Kageyama, demanding to know when it was his turn. Without even looking at him, Kageyama tells him to shut up and calls him a headband idiot. Naruko takes offense to being called an idiot. However, Shigure is rather amazed that Naruko hadn't burst into tears again. Kageyama tells Naruko that his turn would come just a little later, and he just had to wait for it. Another swordsman and shielder rush up to Kazuya, who quickly dodges their attacks. Kazuya couldn't help but be in awe of their pretty flawless teamwork. They were perfectly aware of each other and what they should do next. For Kazuya, it felt like he was fighting one big nasty monster. The image of the First Year Alliance morphs into a crab-like monster before him. As the monster rushes for him with its claws outstretched, Kazuya swings his bat in front of him. The crab monster turns back into the actual image of the First Year Alliance, and Kazuya rams the side of his bat against the shielder before him as hard as he could. Despite thinking they were one big monster, the First Year's skills just weren't good enough to pose a threat to him. He pushes on the shielder as much as he can until the contestant topples over from the pressure and the weight of his armor. More contestants rush up to him, swords drawn. Kazuya's view of them shifts back into the crab monster, wailing at him angrily and attacking mercilessly. But Kazuya knew that if just one of them fell, the whole unit would naturally crumble. Kazuya freezes in time as another rain of weapons barely misses him. Kazuya says that he was getting bored, asking how long they were going to try the same thing over and over. He dashes past the volley of weapons. Kazuya couldn't help but think to himself that the Alliance's teamwork was rather good. He wonders how long they had been practicing their strategy. After all, the match details were only revealed today. He couldn't believe that Kageyama was able to gather and coordinate so many people in such a short time. Kageyama asks if Kazuya really thought that they were doing the same thing over and over. If that was the case, they would do something else. With Kazuya's back turned, a shield from behind him suddenly shifts. Something swiftly makes its way up to him as Kageyama says that he set everything up so they could defeat him. With Naruko suddenly appearing on his blind spot, dagger in hand, they would deal the perfect strike. Kazuya whips his head around in surprise, realizing too late that Naruko was hidden among all the weapons that had rained down on him earlier. Naruko's eyes are deadly as he gains the advantage over Kazuya in speed and angle, driving the weapon into him. From up the bleachers, Kazuya's parents scream in alarm, but Mao doesn't even flinch. A drop of blood hits the battleground. The dagger that was supposed to stab Kazuya was frozen mid-attack, its blade in Kazuya's hand as he held it back. Naruko lets out a cough of pain as Kazuya drives his fist right into his chest, rendering him immobile. Kazuya compliments them for the amazing tactic, however. They just weren't strong enough yet. Naruko falls to the ground, coughing heavily from Kazuya's punch. Kazuya turns to Kageyama and Shigure, realizing they were the only ones left. He asks what other plans Kageyama had left for him, but Kageyama could only click his tongue in annoyance. Clenching his fist tight, he tells Kazuya not to get carried away and calls him a cheater boss. Suddenly, someone steps into the battlefield. The council members had begun to make their move. The one beside Karen apologizes to her, saying that she was joining in. She figured that if the first years could push him that hard, then they might stand a chance if all of the second and third years joined forces. She asks Karen what she planned on doing. Karen seems to hesitate in answering. Chapter 17. Karen watches as all the other second years and council members make their way to the main battlefield. After hesitating, Karen finally admits that she wanted to fight against Kazuya fair and square. The student council girl walks away, raising her sword higher. She figured that that was what was so cool about Karen in the first place. Karen doesn't say anything in reply. The girl says that she couldn't afford to worry about appearance. As such, she was going to get the secret to skills from Kazuya, one way or another. Stepping up to Kazuya, the girl raises her sword up to him. She asks if he would consider all of them ganging up on him a dirty move. Kazuya's face is unimpressed as he says that he never would. With a crazed look in his eyes, Kazuya says that warm-up was finally over and it looked like things were finally getting interesting. The student council girl readies her sword and charges in at the same time as the others, saying that Kazuya really had absolutely no charm. Kazuya is quickly surrounded and slowly getting overwhelmed. He's holding his own for the meantime, but even he knew that there were too many of them. He couldn't attack them all in time. He guessed he didn't have a choice. Although he remembers Mao telling him not to overdo it, it was time for him to get serious. Almost like she was realizing what he was planning, Mao sat up in a panic at the bleachers. Yelling loudly, she calls him an idiot and to stop what he was doing. Pulling back his arm and his weapon, Kazuya can only hope that his enemies don't seriously get hurt. He swings his bat. He makes a direct hit to the man's shield, but he freezes in shock and disbelief. His break attack didn't activate. It didn't even leave as much as a crack on the man's shield. As he worries about his attack not working, Kageyama takes the chance to sneak up on him. He's able to cut at Kazuya's back in the midst of the confusion, but still it isn't enough. Bothering Kageyama greatly, he makes a mad dash in a different direction, trying to get some breathing room, but his enemies are hot on his trail. They realize that the last hit did some damage. They think that if they just kept things up, and with that many people on hand, they would be able to overwhelm him eventually. Kazuya grits his teeth in anger at their words as he gains more distance from them. However, with his focus elsewhere, he runs straight into an outstretched spear. His speed combined with the actual attack deals some damage to his torso, sending him to the ground. Shigure frowns down at him, saying that he was beginning to let his guard down. Kazuya frowns before he pivots and leaps up. In an instant, he's up in the air and away from the others. He lands a few feet away from them, making them click their tongue in anger at his speed. Kazuya realized he could still use physical ability enhancements, but he couldn't use Bash. As his hand clenches over the Sugiyama Deluxe, his eyes widen in realization of what was wrong. Up on the bleachers, Shimizu couldn't help but wonder why Kazuya wasn't using his skills. Mao answers her question, saying that it was only natural. After all, Kazuya's weapon was nothing but a staff. Unlike a sword or a mace, he hadn't raised his proficiency with it at all. Kazuya frowns at himself. He had completely forgotten how the game mechanics work. A player had to reach a certain proficiency level with their weapon to be able to use break attacks with that weapon. It was why Sugiyama had warned him about using it in the first place. Right now, all he could use was magic, using his healing to mend the wound Kageyama had made on his back. But also, he was up against all of them. Kazuya laughs out loud. With a maniacal grin on his face, he says that things were getting interesting. He raises his bat again. I've been calling it a bat all this time because he uses it like one, so I thought it was only fitting. The student council girl from before frowns nervously at his expression. But for Kazuya, the idea of being in a pinch like he was right now, it was simply a challenge. It was in moments like that that one would get stronger. Bat raised, he leaps in the air and into a crowd of enemies. The moment he lands, he swings wildly at them. His attacks immediately make them scatter and fly all over the place, but Kazuya only grins in joy. He topples enemy after enemy. In an instant, he has Kageyama down on the ground by the throat while his other hand easily breaks Shigure's spear in half with the Sugiyama Deluxe. Both of them are unable to do anything to fight back. Up on the bleachers, the spectators are completely stunned. The principal and President Sasahara are just as dumbfounded. His parents and Mao stare in worry, and Karen is completely silent. After what seemed like an instant, Kazuya was the only one standing, surrounded by the wounded and defeated bodies of the other students. He's breathing, exhausted but also with his own fair share of wounds. From behind him, the student council girl curses, unable to believe that even with all of them, they couldn't take him down. However, after a while, Kazuya falls to his knees, only staying upright using his bat as a crutch. As he thought so, his healing magic couldn't keep up with him yet. At the very least, he was reassured that that was the last of them. However, just as he thinks so, he flinches at the sudden pressure of someone's presence. He looks up, realizing that Karen was the only one left. He smiles lightly, but Karen suddenly calls out to him. Holding out a bottle, she tells Kazuya to drink it. Taking the bottle from her, Kazuya realizes that it was a high potion. She tells him that if he used it, any wound would heal in an instant. From behind Karen, the student council girl yells out to her, asking what she thought she was doing. Karen apologizes, but she says that there was no point in fighting Kazuya if he was already weakened. With sword and shield ready, Karen says that only by defeating Kazuya at his very best could she truly call herself the strongest in the school. The student council girl calls out to her, concerned, but Karen doesn't budge. She already made up her mind. Before the tournament had begun, she was able to meet up with Mao. Karen was happy that she came to see the tournament. Mao compliments Karen's gear, saying that it looked great on her. Her words make Karen grin, pleased. They find a bench to settle down in, and Karen admits that she was starting to lose some of her confidence, wondering if she had any talent at all. Mao comments that she didn't sound like herself. Karen admits that ever since she met Kazuya, she had started to question if what she called effort was even really effort at all. However, she says that it also reminded her just how important it was that she kept on trying. Mao looks at the ceiling, listening intently to her words. Quickly changing the subject, she pulls out a bottle and hands it to Karen. She had brought it for her with some extra cash she had on hand. Karen is surprised to see that it was a high potion, especially knowing that it was super expensive. Mao says that she didn't know what the rules for the tournament would be since it was different every year. But she wanted Karen to be able to fight Kazuya with everything she got. She would leave it up to Karen how she planned on using it. Mao smiles at her warmly, saying that she was sure Karen's sister would do the same thing. Karen is unable to say anything else, but she's touched by the thought. Mao suddenly remembers that it should be time for the opening ceremony to start, and Karen panics as she realizes that she was right. Back in the present, Kazuya struggles to get up, Mao's high potion on hand. He tries to say that even without the high potion, he would be able to fight, but his words are quickly cut off. Karen turns to him, eyes burning with fierce determination. Realizing what she wanted to say, Kazuya accepts. She douses himself in the high potion, effectively healing all of his wounds from his battles thus far in the tournament. He tells Karen that she was going to regret her decision of giving him the potion, but fully recovered, he gets into battle position one more time. Karen declares that she isn't going to lose, and immediately she rushes up to him. She lets out a loud cry as she raises her sword, ready to strike him with everything she got. Her attack barely misses Kazuya as he dashes up to her too. Excited at the idea of a good fight, Kazuya smiles as he nears her. When he's within striking distance, he pulls his bat back and swings it forward with crushing force. Karen grits her teeth as she takes the attack with her shield. Kazuya leaps back as Karen remains upright despite the hit. He compliments her, finding it impressive that a single blow wasn't enough to take her down. Karen returns his smile. Karen says that of course one attack wouldn't be enough. She runs up to him again, eyes deadly and sword ready. She swings it down at him hard. Kazuya uses his bat to parry the attack. Momentarily distracted, Karen takes the chance to swing her foot forward to snag at his leg, but in an instant, Kazuya leaps away from the attack. As he jumps away, Karen is immediately after him, bringing her sword down on him again. Kazuya can only block her succession of quick attacks. As she goes for another slash, Kazuya takes the chance to swing at her too, and their weapons clash mid-strike. Watching from the sidelines, Shigure slowly approaches, spear in hand. He pulls his arm back, ready to take a jab at Kazuya, but he freezes when a sword stops him. From beside him, Kageyama tells him to stay out of the fight. Shigure lowers his spear and they watch in silence as Kazuya and Karen continue to exchange blows. However, as they fight, excited smiles light up their faces. Kageyama tells Shigure that no interference was allowed. At some point in the fight, Kazuya slams his bat hard at Karen again. However, unlike last time, it breaks into the material. Seeing his chance, Kazuya raises his bat higher in the air. He slams it into the broken part of the shield again. The force sends Karen back and she falls to the ground. She struggles to get up, coughing from the effort of the fight. Kazuya says that Karen was incredible, not really thinking that she would be so persistent. Karen grits her teeth as she stares up at him. Kazuya raises his bat once more. As he slams it down directly at her, he tells her that it was game over. Karen watches as Kazuya swings his weapon at her, forcing herself to move. With each beat, it got closer and closer. At the very last second, her body listens to her. Kazuya's weapon crashes hard upon contact, but his expression morphs into confusion. The dust clears and he finds that Karen is completely gone. Realization dawns on him and he looks up. Karen was high in the sky, sword at the ready. All around them, the audience is in an uproar. They couldn't believe the height of Karen's jump, adding that no human could possibly do that. But Karen was quickly falling, her sword prepared to swing. She lets out a battle cry as she slashes at Kazuya the moment he's within attacking distance. Kazuya uses his bat to deflect the attack at the moment. The both of them grit their teeth from the strength of their collision. Karen quickly leaps back, making sure there was distance between them for her next move. Kazuya had an idea of what was happening to Karen. Although tired and breathing heavily, Karen was showing signs of physical ability increase. Even some of the adults watching and Mr. Ujihara had realized the same thing. Karen had obtained a new skill. She got up on unsteady legs, ready to fight one more time. Kazuya grinned at her, awed that Karen had gotten stronger in the middle of their fight. Karen pulls back her arm before letting a yell and slashing towards him. He barely has any time to block the attack with the hilt of his bat. His expression changes to one of shock as he realizes that the force of her attack was more powerful now, the sheer strength of it making her blade crack. She leaps away from him again. However, Kazuya also noticed something different about her besides a new skill. Observing her, Karen was breathing way too heavily, her face coated in sweat. Kazuya realized that Karen herself had not realized that she obtained a new skill. What was worse was that her stamina couldn't keep up with the skill. Karen was struggling to remain upright. Kazuya got into position. If possible, he really wanted to draw out the full potential out of her. Kazuya rushed up to her and stopped just in front of her, pulling his bat back. He swung it with all his might. Karen can only grit her teeth as she braces for the hit. Still, his attack is too much for her to handle and she crashes to the ground. As she groans out in pain from her rough fall, Kazuya approaches her, asking if the battle is over already. Karen tries to get up through the pain. Kazuya whispers just loud enough for her to hear, saying that he was sick and tired of hearing about the school's strongest. The audience around them stir in confusion, wondering what Kazuya was saying to her. With cold eyes looking down at her, Kazuya says that if Karen didn't amount to much, then her big sister wouldn't have been much either. Karen's eyes go wide as she stares at him and something in her snaps. Kazuya is unaware of her sudden shift in emotions and keeps going, saying that despite using 3 years trying to obtain a skill, this was still the best she could do. Shigure and Kageyama are able to hear his words, frowning in disgust. Just as Kazuya says that the battle was a waste of time, he flinches as his senses suddenly pick up something. In the nick of time, he had dodged Karen's attack as she slashed her sword at him, her weapon striking the earth where he stood. Kazuya was taken aback by the strength of her power and leapt back. Kazuya grins as he realizes he was right. Mr. Ujihara couldn't believe what was happening. Karen lifts her sword from the ground. Her eyes are ablaze as she screams that Kazuya shouldn't mock her sister and everyone else. She comes at him immediately, rushing in so quickly that even Kazuya was taken aback by her speed. Watching her close the distance between them in an instant, Kazuya realizes he wouldn't be able to dodge in time. She swings her sword and Kazuya raises his weapon to deflect the attack as much as he could. The collision of their weapons makes a resounding noise from the sheer power of her blow. In her anger, Karen screams for Kazuya to get lost and die. Kazuya loses the strength battle and he goes flying from her attack. He quickly gets back up, raising his own weapon as Karen was quickly rushing up to him again. Kazuya knew he would have been in trouble if he couldn't defend against that. But with a determined grin, he knew that that was what made a real and worthy match. It was a match for them to decide which one was stronger. They let out battle cries as they pull their weapons back, ready for the next attack. Their weapons clang echoes throughout the stadium one more time. The ground breaks beneath them from the strength of their collision. For a while, their weapons hold off one another, but eventually Kazuya wins the strength battle, and his swing is enough to throw Karen off. Karen couldn't believe it. She had never met someone who had made her feel so frustrated before. No matter how hard she chased him, she couldn't catch him, and she just ended up panicking more. However, she still didn't have enough determination to win. She goes crashing to the ground, breathing heavily from the exhaustion of the fight and her newfound skills. Kazuya's breathing is just as unsteady, but he's able to stand up. He tells her that he took back everything he said. He turns his back on her as he admits that she was strong, but it was still his win. From the ground, Karen sobs. Her hand is wrapped tightly around the hilt of her broken sword. From the sidelines, Kageyama reminds the announcer that the battle is already over, and the man snaps out of his thoughts. Immediately, he announces that the winner of the year's great competition was Kazuya. However, despite the announcement, the other contestants are in an uproar, telling Kazuya not to screw with them. Some say that he made a whole mess of the whole tournament. The others, ignited by the ones who spoke out, quickly call Kazuya a cheating bastard and tell him never to come back to the school again. Pretty soon, almost everyone is yelling at him. Kazuya remains mostly unbothered, but mainly because it was how he expected for them to react. Looking up at the sky, he says that he really didn't like school. Eventually, the day ends and workers take down the setup used in the arena. From the bleachers, the first-year alliance quietly sat together. Kageyama is the first to speak up, saying that the fight was already over. Naruko cries out that it was already over when he woke up, and Kageyama agrees, saying that he just fainted after all. Their seniors and the audience had already left. Without turning to an armored student, Kageyama asks them how long they were planning on wearing their helmet. The student flinches before taking off their helmet, revealing the crying face of Tsuyoshi. He apologizes to Kageyama, but Kageyama tells him that he was pretty strong too, so he should have some confidence. Tsuyoshi tries to disagree, but instead chooses to say that the battle was surprisingly refreshing. Kageyama agrees. With one mind, they all promise to become even stronger as they stare at the battle-ruined stage of the tournament, somewhere else in the school. Ujihara's face is serious as he looks down at a document in hand. From beside him, he asks Kazuya if he really had all the skills listed on the paper. Kazuya merely says that he forgot what Ujihara taught him about proficiency. He asks Ujihara how he could become stronger, but Ujihara points out that he was already plenty strong. Kazuya says that he wanted to learn more skills. At that moment, the door to the office they were at slams open and Mao comes in, screaming for Kazuya. Kazuya asks what she was doing there, and Mao says that she was obviously there to complain. Kazuya changes the subject and apologizes for what happened to Karen. Mao frowns, confused by his words. Kazuya says that he was the one who beat her up so badly, but Mao only calls him an idiot. She asks him how he could have held back in that situation. In fact, she argues that if he had not given it his all, it would have been more rude. Mao reminds him that Karen wasn't a girl who would break so easily. Kazuya thinks back on how Karen left the tournament stage, sobbing, supported by one of the student council officers, her hand still tightly gripping her broken sword. In the present, he thanks Mao for reassuring him. However, Mao quickly gives him noogies, saying that their fight was still way too dangerous. Kazuya shrieks from the attack. Stepping back, Mao asks why Kazuya had approached Ujihara. "I'm not going to lie. Ujihara's pronouns keep shifting. I have no idea anymore." Kazuya says that he wanted them to check out his skills directly and have a look at his skill sheet. Kazuya says that he's trained to get staff proficiency too, but he hadn't been able to get the skills he needed. Looking at the skill sheet, Mao couldn't comprehend all the skills she was seeing. Kazuya turns to Ujihara again. He asks them if maybe there was something he needed to do to be able to unlock a new skill or something. Similar to how Karen got her new skill after he berated her, I don't think that's something to be proud of, Kazuya. Mao tries to hold him back, but Ujihara admits that his thought process wasn't necessarily that wrong idea. The people at the Appraisal Association were currently investigating that very concern. However, they haven't announced it publicly yet. It appears that there were some rules to how skills were obtained. Kazuya and Mao listen quietly to their explanation. In the past century, weapon technology had progressed incredibly fast, which might have been the cause of humanity losing the knowledge for learning skills. There were also no documents still around that mentioned it. Much of what Kazuya knew about skills was beyond their current knowledge. Ujihara says that the association would love it if he shared as much information as he could. They were even willing to reward him handsomely for the info. Mao looked at Kazuya in concern as he seemed to really think about the proposal. Kazuya finally admits that he was thinking about going to a dungeon, so he wanted Ujihara to tell him all they knew about them. Mao is confused, but Kazuya remains determined. Ujihara asks what dungeon it was. Mao tries to cut in between them, but ultimately Ujihara says that they would gladly answer Kazuya with everything they knew. Kazuya explains that when he looked it up, only the name of the place popped up. However, it was a place he really wanted to go to. It was called the Fuji Sea of Trees. Ujihara explains that many adventurers had lost their lives aiming for sacred Mount Fuji. Almost nobody wanted to keep challenging it, so it would be difficult to go to a place like that. However, as they look up something online, Ujihara says that for some reason, there appeared to be a bus heading there from the guild tomorrow. Kazuya excitedly says that they would go there tomorrow, and he turns expectantly to Mao. Mao immediately refuses, saying that no amount of lives would be enough for her to go to a place like that. Kazuya agrees that it was dangerous, but he tells her not to worry. After all, they still had their secret weapon. Mao is confused as Kazuya searches his pockets. He holds up the return stone from before, saying that with that, they would be able to make it back home in one piece. Kazuya's eyes are bright with determination as he smiles at Mao, eventually making her cave in. At the Shizuoka Adventurers Guild Hall, Shimizu enters Jinai's office, happily announcing that Kazuya had won the grand tournament. She adds that Kazuya was able to crush the older students despite just being a first-year student. However, as she looks around, she realizes that Jinai wasn't even in the room to begin with. She scoffs in disbelief that he slipped off somewhere again without telling anyone. However, Shimizu catches sight of something resting on the table. It was an application for a pass to enter the Fuji Sea of Trees. She couldn't understand why there was a need for one. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of a grand mountain, Kazuya blinks his eyes open as someone calls out to him. He rubs the sleep out of his eyes to realize that it was Mao who was trying to wake him up. Mao comments that she had never seen someone fall asleep on the way to a dungeon before. Eventually, their bus stops at the gateway to the dungeon. Disembarking the bus, Kazuya stares up in awe. It was a little different from how it looked in the game. However, he was still very excited. His thoughts are disrupted when someone rudely bumps into him. An armored adventurer tells him that he was in the way. Kazuya apologizes and the man passes by him, reminding him not to space out in the middle of the path. Mao explains that everyone there was on edge because they were risking their lives, confusing Kazuya. She continues to say that the Fuji Sea of Trees was one of the most difficult dungeons there was. Thanks to the minerals accumulated from volcanic explosions and the mana all the monsters emit, neither compasses nor smartphones worked in the dungeon. The Fuji Sea of Trees was a place everyone was scared to just enter. Kazuya asks if Mao herself was scared too. Mao admits that she was, especially since she wasn't all that good at fighting. Kazuya was rather surprised that she came with him anyway. Mao says it was because they were a party. Pumped up, Kazuya urges them to hurry it up and enter the dungeon already. But Mao says that they aren't ready yet. Kazuya overhears a man calling for the surrounding adventurers' attention, telling them to take a look at something before entering the forest. Kazuya turns to find the other adventurers surrounding a kiosk, the salesman informing them that he brought a bunch of excellent weapons for them. Mao informs Kazuya that the current expedition was sponsored by a firearms manufacturer. The salesman tells the adventurers to buy some of their latest models before they enter the mountain. Apparently, it would increase their likelihood of survival and they would have an easy time collecting monster materials. Kazuya watches as one more weapon is showcased to the public, the salesman calling it the company's crown jewel. It was a heavy armored anti-magic beast interceptor tank called the Dragonaut. With all due respect, wouldn't a tank have a hard time traversing through a forest? The salesman continues to say that it came with a massive main cannon that was made with the finest mana and monster materials, so it was able to pierce any scales or shells. To top it all off, it even came equipped with a dragon blood engine. They've already recently improved the fuel efficiency from burning monster blood or parts in the energy furnace. The surrounding adventurers all exclaim in amazement. The salesman continues, adding that it came with anti-magic shields that can block almost all attacks and for a limited time only. The weapon was on offer for the adventurers at a very good price. Mao asks if Kazuya could afford the tank, and with a deadpan and unamused look on his face, Kazuya says that there was no way he was buying it. He now understood why everyone turned in monster materials in such poor condition. All the other adventurers used firearms. Even if one would increase their firearms proficiency and learn the skills necessary, none of the skills were very versatile. He couldn't understand why everyone relied on them so much. Mao notices the deep frown on Kazuya's face and speaks up, casually saying that it couldn't be helped because everyone was scared. Kazuya looks up at her as she explains that the other adventurers wanted to improve their chances of survival every little bit they could. She reminds Kazuya that none of them were strong like him. Mao says that she was reminded of something when she watched his tournament battle the other day. Fighting opponents with all they got seemed like the better option. However, she says that it wasn't something he could force other people to do. Kazuya frowns, asking her if not everyone wants to become stronger. Mao agrees, but she says that that wasn't the point of what she was saying. Their conversation is cut short by the sound of screaming. They whip their heads around to see a couple of adventurers raising their newly acquired weapons against a monster. It was a creature with what appeared to be a morphed deer skull for a head, multiple arms, and a more humanoid appearance as it stood on two legs. While two of its arms seemed to make a prayer gesture, it held a scythe in another hand. It stared down the adventurers ominously as it left the safety of the forest and approached the clearing. Some of the adventurers seemed to freeze at its approaching figure, but a braver adventurer immediately took aim and shot the creature. However, as the bullets approached it, the monster seemed unconcerned. The bullets passed by its body and the creature disappeared in a wisp of smoke. The adventurers are left confused, but Kazuya screams at them, saying that the monster was right in front of them. At that moment, the monster appears once more. Seeing their chance, the salesman orders for the Dragonaut to intercept it. The tank is immediately activated and shoots a cannon right at the monster. The recoil sends the monster flying back. A large explosion echoes throughout the clearing from the attack. Kazuya and Mao shield themselves from the aftershock of the explosion. The salesman laughs in triumph, proud of their superior firepower. A large crater is left from the attack, and the salesman announces that the monster was completely powerless against their Dragonaut. However, as the dust completely settled, the salesman stood in shock to see the monster. It had taken the full force of the attack, but it wasn't the least bit hurt. If anything, it seemed even more angered. From the eye socket of the monster's skull head, a handful of eyes opens as it shrieks in anger. The monster leaps into the air, scythe ready for attack. In a single powerful strike, it pierces through the tank. It swings the scythe in a flurry of moves and slices the outstretched cannon neck into pieces. It shrieks in anger, and through the chaos, the adventurers panic and make a run for it. Mao turns and calls out to Kazuya as she pulls on his sleeve, saying that they needed to get out of there as soon as possible. However, Kazuya doesn't move despite the monster turning back to them, finished destroying the Dragonaut. The monster seems to seethe in anger, and yet makes no move. Kazuya remains quiet, silently watching it despite Mao calling out to him in a frenzy. However, just as quickly the monster disappears again in a wisp of smoke. Mao was confused, but Kazuya says that he didn't feel it showing any ill will toward them. If anything, he thinks the monster accomplished its goal and went home. Mao asks how he knew all that, and Kazuya says that he just did somehow, which just made Mao more confused. Kazuya knew that the monster was called Baphomet, and it was most likely the boss of that area of the Fuji Sea of Trees. Kazuya's excitement only spikes because of the encounter. Mao leans towards him, hoping she was wrong in her assumptions, but she doesn't even get to ask her question. Kazuya cuts her off, heading towards the dungeon entrance and urging her to clear the Fuji Sea of Trees with him. Mao is immediately against the idea, saying that there was no way for them to fight the Baphomet. Kazuya brushes her worries aside, pointing out that the bus they used to come there already left them behind. Mao exclaims in disbelief, but Kazuya reassures her that they had the return stone, so they can just use it if things went wrong. Mao deflates as she thinks of her options. Eventually, the two of them pass through the gate leading further in. Mao makes Kazuya promise that they would leave the moment things got dangerous. Kazuya promises and asks her to trust him. However, Mao tells him that she didn't trust him one bit. They leave behind the burning remains of the Dragonaut and formally enter the Fuji Sea of Trees. Mao holds her dead phone in one hand and a compass going haywire in another. The rumors were true, neither were able to work properly while inside the dungeon. She cries out in horror, saying that they were surely done for. Kazuya doesn't look impressed, reminding her to quiet down or she would scare the monsters away. As Kazuya pulls their cart of supplies forward, Mao suggests they go home already since they've been walking for an hour already. Kazuya frowns, saying that he didn't want to leave the dungeon after just walking around. Mao changes the subject to the monster from the gate entrance, Baphomet. She says that she's never heard of a monster like that before. Kazuya suggests that it may have killed everyone before they could tell others about it. Mao asks how he knew the name of the monster in the first place, and Kazuya makes up the excuse that he saw something like it in a book once. Mao sighs in exasperation, asking what was up with him. She asks why he wanted to clear the dungeon so badly. Kazuya frowns, trying to think of a good excuse. He knew he couldn't tell her it was because he had knowledge from the original game. Surely she would think he was crazy if he told her he was reincarnated. With Kazuya remaining quiet, Mao sighs and brushes the question aside. Mao says that they can keep walking for another hour, but after that they were going home if nothing happened by then, and Kazuya agrees. Mao just found it strange that they haven't seen a single monster since entering. Kazuya agrees, wondering if they really should go back to town after all. Mao says she appreciates the thought, but she doesn't get to continue her words. Something cold drips onto her face and she looks up in surprise. She flinches to find a monstrous snake looking down at her with a glare. Kazuya immediately gets in between her and the snake. She tries to argue with him, but Kazuya orders her to get behind him immediately. The monster was a poison snake and very much venomous. Although scared, Mao tried to reason with Kazuya again, but he wasn't having it. He takes out his weapons and yells at her to get out of there that instant. Mao only hesitates for a second before she quickly ducks and leaves Kazuya to stand off against the monster alone. Even with his weapon out and Mao leaving, the monster doesn't make a move. If anything, it seemed rather vigilant of Kazuya. He almost expected it from a dungeon monster. He waits for it to attack. But before either of them could do anything, the bushes close to Kazuya began to rustle. Another poison snake bursts from the bushes. As it quickly slides up to Kazuya, he realizes belatedly that the one in front of him was nothing but a distraction. The snake opens its mouth, revealing a set of sharpened teeth. Kazuya freezes, berating himself for being so careless. He braces himself for the inevitable hit. The snake clamps down on the side of his torso, burying itself deep with its teeth. Kazuya slams his sword down on it. The snake lets go of him for only a moment before biting him again, this time using its tongue to lock itself onto Kazuya. Kazuya slams his weapon on the snake again, but the snake was so soft that his attacks weren't connecting properly. He hits it again and again to not much effect. At the rate they were going, it would cling to him until he inevitably collapsed. He grunts in pain and his vision blurs. His body starts to tremble as he realizes that the venom was taking its course. He curses, trying to focus on getting away. However, his strength was carefully being sapped the longer the snake clung to him. All of a sudden, Kazuya flinches as the snake clinging to him seemingly explodes. It lets go of him and goes down, a large wound on its body. Kazuya is surprised to see it was a gunshot wound. He looks up to find Mao holding a rifle. His confusion is short-lived as the snake from in front of him earlier turns to look in Mao's direction. It immediately rushes up to Mao. Kazuya screams for her to make a run for it. Mao tries her best to shoot it down, but without the element of surprise, the snake easily maneuvers its way past her bullets. Kazuya tries to run to her rescue, but he's weakened by the venom in his body. He's unable to move except to watch as the snake appears directly in front of Mao. She freezes in fear as the snake opens its mouth, revealing its fangs. At that moment, Kazuya remembers something. During that time he first picked out the Sugiyama Deluxe, Mao had asked him why he chose a staff. Kazuya said it was because it was a really rare weapon choice. However, that wasn't all there was to it. There was a skill he wanted to learn first. It was a skill that was perfect for him since he's only been able to fight in melee range. It was a way to target enemies at range, the magic skill. Kazuya lifted the Sugiyama Deluxe and held the hilt outwards like a makeshift gun. Immediately, he's surrounded by a tornado of flames. He lets out a powerful battle cry as he summons a fire arrow. The arrow flies through the air. It hits the snake square in the back. The force of the attack and the flames burn at the snake's body, immediately sending it to the ground. Kazuya stares at the Sugiyama Deluxe in awe. However, his awe is quickly replaced by exhaustion and he collapses to the ground. Mao runs up to him in a panic. She helps him up, ordering him to stay awake. Kazuya tries to reassure her, saying that it was okay because the poison hadn't spread through his whole body yet. Mao orders him to hurry up and heal already. Kazuya agrees, however he says that they should get out of there first, much to Mao's confusion. At just that moment, more figures appear from the bushes. Kazuya says that he thinks they were currently at a poison snake nest. Mao couldn't believe it, but Kazuya was quickly losing consciousness. Kazuya says that the path ahead was most likely crawling with more snakes. He suggests that they use the return stone immediately. Mao argues that they couldn't. Using a return stone required absolute focus. If they closed their eyes now, they were dead. As if to prove his point, one of the poison snakes slithers closer to them, but not close enough. Kazuya tells Mao that his magic was still on cooldown from using the Sugiyama Deluxe earlier, and his heal skill didn't seem to work on the poison. He grunts in pain again and Mao tries to help him, adding that he should stop trying to speak. Kazuya was breathing heavily. The poison had left him completely immobilized. Mao knew that the only cure was magic or getting an antidote from the base of the mountain. She watches in concern as sweat starts coating Kazuya's skin from the effects of the poison on his body. Mao frowns, asking if she could really do things. Her frown deepens as she remembers that in her past she wasn't able to save anyone. She's reminded of her time back in school, particularly of a certain day. As she was walking to school, a girl had suddenly clung to her, excitedly congratulating her. When the initial shock of her arrival passes, Mao asks the girl in pigtails what the congratulations were for. The girl clarifies that it was for her win in the dismantling division at the prefectural tournament. The girl shows Mao a press photo of her during her award ceremony. Mao brushes off the conversation and the girl is lightly annoyed, jokingly mocking Mao for acting like winning the event was no big deal. Mao tells her to cut her some slack. As they walk, another girl with long hair joins them. Hearing their conversation, the girl with long hair says that Mao was at the top of the class, survived Spartan-like training from her adventurer parents since she was a kid, and was a crack shot with a gun. Not only that, but she worked harder than anyone. The girl was more surprised that an elite student like Mao was even at their school. Mao blushes from all the compliments, telling her to stop since she was terrible at actual combat. The girl in pigtails grins up at her, saying that she would just have to protect Mao. She holds up a fist to Mao and says that they should form the ultimate party together one day. Mao's blush deepens and she purses her lips together, obviously touched by the thought. She agrees, and her friends loop their arms around her as they continue their walk to school. Mao knew she had such reliable friends, and she thought she would live a perfectly ordinary life as an adventurer. But her memories shift, and suddenly she's in a forest, splattered in blood. She looks up at a terrifying bear-like monster and a female knight staring one another down. Through her tears, Mao listens as the female knight tells her it was okay. The woman casts her one determined look before saying that she would get Mao out of there. With a single powerful slash, she cuts at the bear's eye. It roars in anger, having been blinded on one side. It quickly makes its escape, roaring all the while and leaving the female knight and Mao alone. Apparently, during their school's practical exam, her classmates encountered a red grizzly monster. The entire team was wiped out. Mao was the only survivor, saved by an adventurer who happened to be passing by. The knight turns to her as Mao falls to her knees. The knight notices that Mao's sword remains sheathed to her side, but Mao doesn't say anything, just breathing hard from the adrenaline and fear. The knight says that Mao was lucky. If she had drawn her sword, she might have been dead already. Some time passes and Mao is sent to a clinic. The same knight from before approached her, asking if she wanted to join her party. Mao is confused, but the knight didn't seem to bother waiting for an answer. She introduces herself as Tanegawa Iren. Iren smiles and hands out her hand to Mao, already welcoming her into the party. They shook their hands in the clinic that day, making a promise. Since that day, Mao couldn't forgive herself for being so helpless. She threw herself into battle, fighting monster after monster, but providing support fire from the rear was the absolute best she could do. And now in the present, all she can think about was Kazuya's question, asking if she wanted to get stronger. Her eyes sharpening into focus, she immediately takes a stance in front of Kazuya. Reloading her rifle, she tells him that he could leave the rest to her. She immediately unloads as many bullets as she can on the ground in front of them and surrounding the snakes. Kazuya watches as Earth is torn apart, kicking up dust everywhere until it was one whole dust cloud. Mao was hoping it would be enough to block their line of sight. Just as expected, the poison snakes are at a loss. It would only buy them a few seconds, but that was enough for her. Mao calls out to Kazuya amidst the chaos again. She brings up their cart and orders him to get on. Kazuya exclaims in surprise as Mao carries him into her arms and drops him off at the cart. When he's safe inside, she immediately makes a run for it, the cart and Kazuya with her. Kazuya clutches onto his weapon in shock of all the sudden events, but Mao declares that they were going to make it back alive. With a determined look in her eyes, she says that that was the strength she's been searching for all this time. She asks Kazuya if he had a problem with that, but Kazuya's eyes brighten at her words and he smiles. He says that he didn't have a problem at all. Left in their dust are the confused nest of poison snakes. In some part of the forest, a pair of deer are calmly getting a drink by a river. They look up in alarm as a flock of birds pass by, mixed with the sound of screaming. Wheels through rough terrain echo, closer and closer. It was Mao and Kazuya, unable to stop with the speed of going down the steep side of the mountain. They scream as they go past the deer, but the deer remain mostly unbothered as they keep going further down. Eventually, they hit the landing. Kazuya compliments Mao for being amazing. Mao leans against the cart's wheel, breathing heavy from the strain of her run. Kazuya, disembarking the cart, says that she had no idea they could move that fast. Mao argues that it was less moving and more falling. Changing the subject, she asks if he was finally okay. Kazuya happily says yes, explaining that he was able to learn a new skill called Cure while they were moving and fixed himself right up. Mao sighs, saying that Kazuya really was unbelievable. Kazuya is confused for a moment, but eventually he just thanks her. Mao remembers that they were popping the return stone and heading home for the day. She says that she was glad that Kazuya was alive, but as she brings out the return stone, Kazuya says that he refused to go back. Immediately, Mao argues with him, saying that they had a deal that if things got dangerous, they would bail on the dungeon. Kazuya argues back that he was the party leader and she needed to listen to what her leader said. He reasons that since he could use Cure now, poison was nothing to be afraid of. Mao tries to say that that wasn't the point she was trying to make. However, Kazuya cuts in and says that Mao was incredibly cool back there. Holding up the Sugiyama Deluxe, he says that he wanted to be able to fight like her too. Mao frowns, saying that all she did was run away, but Kazuya says that it was more of a strategic retreat. He wanted to practice magic a little longer. He aims the Sugiyama again and fires. Mao remembers that Kazuya had indeed said that he wanted to do that before. Honestly, for her, seeing him use magic like he did didn't even surprise her anymore. With Kazuya, growth like that was just part of the course. She couldn't help but think that he put in so much effort that feeling jealous would just be an insult to him and his progress. She watches quietly as Kazuya's magic slowly takes shape. What appeared to be a phoenix-like creature made of flames appeared before them. Kazuya stared up at it with sparkling eyes. Watching him, Mao couldn't help but think that maybe that was exactly why she was starting to feel like she could do it too. Like she should push herself just a bit harder. She smiles, finally making up her mind. She tells Kazuya that they could stick around, but in one condition. Mao tells him that she wanted to get stronger too. Next time they encounter a monster, but instead of running away, she wants the strength to protect her team. She was going to find that strength right there in that dungeon. Mao gripped onto her blade tightly. She was going to find her own way of fighting. Pleased by her declaration, Kazuya's mouth stretches into a wide grin. As he says that he knew asking her to join his party was the right choice, he uses the Sugiyama Deluxe to fire at the forest behind Mao. She's immediately on high alert as she hears something coming towards them. Kazuya asks her to help him with his magic training. Just then, a large plant-like creature erupts from the ground, shrieking wildly. Kazuya calls it a balloon flower, a monster that mimics a flower to ambush prey that got too close to it. Kazuya and Mao quickly go back, trying to get some distance between them and the monster. He continues to explain that the flower part of the monster was rubbery and resistant to physical attacks. It was the perfect target for magic practice. Mao asks him what he wanted her to do. Kazuya tells her that the roots were likely extended all throughout the area, so he needed her to keep on the lookout. However, Kazuya adds that he hasn't seen Mao's dismantling skills in a while. Mao is rather touched that he remembered, but she plays it cool, saying that he really didn't let up. However, Kazuya did give her a rather expensive knife. Getting into battle formation, Mao says that she was going to skin and dice the monster so perfectly and make sure every piece fetched the highest market price. Summoning his firepower, Kazuya says that he was counting on her. In an instant, he fires flames right at the balloon flower, making a part of it catch on flames. Kazuya tries to close the distance, but immediately roots burst from the floor below him. They fly at him at incredible speed, but Kazuya dodges them easily enough. He leaps into the air, and when he's right above the balloon flower, he releases another powerful attack right at its core. In an instant, the monster is down. Mao takes out her knife and quickly gets to work dismantling it. They face off against more of the balloon flowers in the forest area. Their faces are full of determination as they throw themselves into the fight. Some time passes and eventually Kazuya is able to fire 5 arrows at once. Even Mao is impressed by the change. Kazuya announces that his level has definitely gone up. Mao says that she finished dismantling on her end too. Looking over the parts they currently have, Kazuya compliments her for the clean work as always. Mao comments that the sharpness of her new knife was incredible. She gets an excited look on her face and says that she was kind of itching to try dismantling some other monsters now as well. Kazuya finds her sudden excitement rather terrifying. Mao straightens up and says that they've hunted enough of the balloon flowers anyway. Kazuya agrees and looks around for another monster. He sees something high in the air and suggests they fight it. It seemed to be a flying sheep-like monster. Kazuya says that if he hit it with his fire arrow, it would get enraged and go berserk. As such, he wanted to try taking it down with a different spell. The sheep monsters float on by above them, and immediately Mao denies his suggestion, saying that the monster was too cute. Kazuya looks at her, unimpressed. Sometime later, one of the sheep monsters stomps its hooves on the soil, getting ready to attack. Mao faces it, holding her knife up. The sheep charges in the next second. From a bit to her side, Kazuya reminds her to keep her eyes on it and not to look away. Kazuya tells her to watch its legs when it jumps. Mao sharpens its gaze, watching the sheep with extreme focus. The sheep was getting closer and closer to her, until finally its legs lift off the ground. Her eyes widened as she realized it was using its left leg. In an instant, she rushes at it, knife drawn. She cuts it down mid-air and it falls to the ground. The sheep makes a small sad noise as Mao whips around. Her face flushed with victory, she celebrates her success. She says that it was the first time she had ever beaten one without the need for a gun. Kazuya claps for her and says congratulations. Kazuya approaches the monster, calling it a Mururu sheep. Apparently, when they jumped, it led with either its right or left leg. Its attack patterns were based on its stance. If it used its right leg, it would swipe at the enemy using its tail, but raising its left leg would indicate charging at its enemy. As he picks up the wounded Mururu sheep, Kazuya compliments her for holding her ground perfectly until the very end. Mao says that she couldn't have done it without his advice. She adds that Kazuya really was a walking encyclopedia, and he awkwardly laughs, looking away. Changing the subject, he asks for Mao's thoughts as he informs her that they could tame the Mururu sheep. Mao is immediately excited. Some time passes and Mao is sitting on the forest floor, the Mururu sheep in her arms. She was petting it furiously from how cute it was while the Mururu sheep was busy eating a balloon flower root. According to Kazuya, if a Mururu sheep was fed its favorite food, there was a good chance it would join them. Mao says that it was a fact that the school definitely didn't teach their students. The Mururu sheep in her hands was busy sucking up the root into its mouth. Kazuya couldn't help but wonder if knowledge on dungeons was really just that scarce. However, he's knocked out of his thoughts when Mao calls out to him. Trying to hide her blushing face in the Mururu sheep's fluff, Mao thanks him for everything. Kazuya is taken aback, asking where everything was coming from all of a sudden. Mao explains that back when she was in adventurer school, her friends were killed during a mock exam. She was useless in a fight, so everyone tried to protect her. Because of that, she was the only one to survive. That was when she joined a party with Eren. Kazuya remembers that Eren was Karen's older sister. Mao continues to say that being with Eren made the guilt she felt a little lighter. She felt like she could finally make up for the lives she failed to save back then. But in the end, she was just being protected again. Which was why it ended with Eren leaving her behind with an apology. After Eren's party disbanded, she was terrified of being around anyone. So she refused to join a team. She stayed in the guild, working solely on dismantling. That was why when Kazuya asked her to join him, she originally planned to say no. But Shimizu gave her the push she needed. Back when she was still thinking about it, Mao had already told Shimizu that she wasn't ready to join a team again. Shimizu asked if she was sure about her decision, and Mao reasons that she would only drag him down. Shimizu says that Kazuya seemed really serious about his offer, making Mao look up at her in confusion. Shimizu continues, saying that Kazuya believed in her, so she just needed to take it one step at a time. She tells Mao that she needed to start believing in herself too. Mao had cried that day, with Shimizu there to comfort her all the while. In the present, Mao gives Kazuya a bright smile as she thanks him for asking her to join his party. Kazuya's face flushes as he thanks her back. He admits that he used to think it was easier to be alone too. However, he had met a senior of his that grew incredibly strong and classmates who learned to work together in no time at all. All of them had someone they wanted to be strong for. Kazuya says that if that was the secret to getting stronger, then he wanted to try it for himself too. Kazuya clenches his fist, but to his surprise, Mao takes his fist into her hands. She laughs, saying that he really never changed. Mao says again that she looked forward to working with him, and Kazuya shares the sentiment. They shake on it, like making a deal renewed. They finally get up, and Mao stretches, saying that since the sun was starting to set, they should probably head back. Kazuya agrees, saying that he promised he would be home by dinner. Mao jokes that Kazuya had a surprisingly cute side to him, and Kazuya tells her to mind her business. As they talk, the Mururu sheep sniffs the air before bounding into the forest. Mao pouts, wondering what happened when they thought it already liked them. She asks Kazuya if a tamed monster could just run away like that. The bushes before them where the sheep ran off to rustle before quieting down. All of a sudden, the ground seems to quake. Mao looks up in alarm as the birds in the area fly away in a panic. Kazuya frowns, already knowing what happened. A large creature growls as it nears them. Kazuya realizes that the sheep hadn't run away from them, instead it had tried to fight something. Mao stares in horror as a large monster crushes the sheep in its jaws in a single bite. Mao wonders in horror what it was, but Kazuya's face is lit up in excitement at the sight of it. The dragon turns to them, noticing their presence. It was a green dragon, the mid-boss of the dungeon. It let out a powerful roar as it approached them. As the dragon focused its eyes at Kazuya, he grins. Kazuya thinks it had perfect timing as he wanted to try out a new spell. He held the Sugiyama Deluxe at the ready as sparks enveloped him.